Hello everyone, I'm very glad that you listened to my story. Please give me a follow and like the video if you enjoyed it. Feel free to comment and provide feedback so I can improve the sound quality. Yes, I will now continue the unfinished story. Chapter 41, Cheat Players Need an Explanation, _1. He heard Li Yueming's voice. All the students stopped their discussion. F***ck. Listen. Was this something a human could say? The weather was 42 degrees. The students felt their blood rush up and their hands and feet turn cold. The group of people was about to retort at Li Yueming. However, when their gazes landed on the reincarnation gate that was still emitting golden light behind Li Yueming, the entire examination hall fell silent, including the invigilators. Everyone widened their eyes. His face was filled with disbelief. The reincarnation gate was actually emitting golden light. He felt the shocked gazes of his classmates. "Why are you looking at me?" Li Yueming asked. No one answered. The invigilator, who had just stood up from his seat, was so frightened that he sat back down on the bench. One had to know. As an invigilator, no one knew better than him what the golden light behind Li Yueming meant. The reincarnation gate was a scoring machine manufactured by the Reincarnation Association. The moment every reincarnator stepped through the reincarnation gate for the first time, the reincarnation gate would light up with the corresponding color to indicate their results. Blue represented a C grade. Purple represents a grade of B. Red represented an A grade. Behind Li Yueming's back was a gold color that symbolized S class. If not for so many people watching, the invigilators would probably think that there was something wrong with their eyes. Linjiang No. 2 Middle School had been established for nearly 100 years. In the past 100 years, there were already very few examines who could reach a class during their first reincarnation. As for the higher S grade score, he had never even heard of them. This miracle had truly appeared in front of him. Thinking of this, the invigilator felt Li Yueming's gaze. He immediately shivered. He came back to his senses and hurriedly stood up. "Hello, Lord Eternal. Reincarnator. Can I register your reincarnation world information?" The Association of Reincarnators was an organization jointly established by all the reincarnators. He just needed to register his personal information in the association. He could receive a lot of subsidies every month. And as a newcomer, if he wanted to know more information, he had to go through the association. Therefore, he had no choice. Li Yueming naturally had no reason to refuse. After obtaining his consent, the invigilator picked up the pen and paper, and his hands and feet were trembling. He found the previously blank column. He finally calmed down and said, "May I ask Lord Li Yueming, what is your reincarnation rating?" Li Yueming turned around. He glanced at the golden reincarnation gate. As you can see, it's S class. Trees stand out in the forest, and the wind will destroy them. An S grade was enough to attract attention. Revealing his SSS rating was undoubtedly an act that required him to recharge his IQ. After hearing this answer, the invigilator's hands began to tremble again. He had obtained an S grade in the first initial simulation. What kind of monster was this? She finally filled in her personal information in the rating column. The invigilator let out a sigh of relief. "All right, Sir Li Yueming, please wait a moment. I'll call the principal over to entertain you." According to the normal procedure, the invigilators would usually ask for more information. For example, after graduation, they would prepare to continue their studies, go directly to the fief to resist the darkness, or join an organization created by other reincarnators. However, these were all prepared for ordinary students. Facing the unprecedented S-grade reincarnator in Linjiang, asking these boring questions was a waste of time. No matter where the other party wanted to develop. In such a world where the simulator was supreme, there would be people who would do everything they could to satisfy him. He bowed respectfully to Li Yueming. The invigilator jogged all the way to the principal's office to pass on the news. Less than 10 minutes later, a loud boom was heard. A cloud of dust rose from the teaching building not far away. The principal had a bald head. Like a gust of wind, he rushed in front of Li Yueming. She grabbed Li Yueming's hand tightly. He smiled like a spring breeze and said, "Do you have any difficulties in life that the principal needs to help you solve?" If it was said that experts did not have hair, the headmaster was probably only a hair's breadth away from becoming an overgod. "Principal, please help me submit a territory application letter as soon as possible," Li Yueming said. "I'm going to head to the territory as soon as possible." Hearing this sentence, the principal's face was filled with disbelief. After hesitating for a moment, he kindly reminded her, "Student Li Yueming, if you choose to go to the territory, it will be equivalent to giving up the opportunity to continue your studies, and you will no longer be able to join the reincarnator forces in the big cities. You're an S-rank graduate. Have you really thought it through?" Regarding this, Li Yueming naturally knew that the so-called opportunity for further studies, it was similar to studying for a master's degree in his previous life. Enter the Reincarnator University to continue studying. The expenses during this period will be covered by the Reincarnator Association. Moreover, he would be rewarded with an additional number of reincarnations every month. It was not without a price for the Reincarnator Association to provide so many resources. After graduating and becoming an outstanding reincarnator, they had to stay in the territory of the Reincarnator Association for 20 years. As for the other big cities simulations, it was an organization created by one or even many powerful reincarnators. They would enter the same reincarnation world and work together to plunder resources. If new reincarnators joined, they could also obtain considerable benefits. The price they had to pay was also very different from the requirements of the Reincarnator Association. With Li Yueming's current condition, whether it was entering the Reincarnator Association or joining a reincarnator force, they were all hotcakes that would be snatched up crazily. That's why. Only then would the principal ask him if he had thought it through. This was because going directly to the territory meant that Li Yueming chose to give up everything and develop on his own. The biggest advantage of this choice was freedom. However, the biggest disadvantage was also freedom. It was very expensive for reincarnators to grow quickly. The resources required were astronomical. Li Yueming might have been lucky this time and obtained a good initial talent. In addition, his basic skills were solid enough to obtain a heaven-defying S-rank score. However, it was impossible for him to be so lucky every time. Even if he took 10,000 steps back, he was really a genius who had both luck and strength. However, just relying on the small amount of production in the territory was only enough for the reincarnators to eat and drink. It was impossible for him to achieve much development. They did not have enough financial support behind them. In the end, they would only be limited by resources. In the bald principal's opinion, he would choose a decent force to join and accumulate enough wealth and experience. In the end, Li Yueming's best choice was to go solo when he had enough strength. In fact, it is true. Unfortunately, he did not know that Li Yueming was different from ordinary reincarnators. He was a cheat player. Let's not talk about anything else. Just the 200,000 reincarnator points in his pocket were enough to buy 10 Linjiang second high schools. Yes, Li Yueming nodded firmly. "Principal, I've thought it through. Please help me with the procedures." Chapter 42, The 580,000,000-year-old baby of the game, _L. After confirming that he had made up his mind, the principal touched his bald head and sighed, "Young people are really fearless, but the principal thinks highly of you." As he spoke, he took out a card from his pocket and said earnestly, "Here, this is the outstanding graduate bursary that the principal gave you on behalf of the Linjiang people. Work hard in the future and contribute more to the human race. Looking at the card in the principal's hand, Li Yueming pondered for a moment but did not refuse. He took it and used the reincarnation mark to scan it. Hua. A total of 10,000 simulation points. The principal really went all out. He took the card. The principal lowered his head and said calmly, "So, which area is student Li Yueming planning to go to?" Hearing this question, Li Yueming touched his chin. He hadn't thought about this yet. Seeing that he was still hesitating, the principal quickly struck while the iron was hot and said, "Do you want to consider staying in Linjiang to develop?" Hearing this, Li Yueming glanced at the principal. She immediately understood what he meant. Linjiang was a remote city in Jiangnan province. After graduating, most of the outstanding reincarnators chose to develop in big cities with more resources. The number of reincarnators in Linjiang had been declining over the years. This was because there was a lack of reincarnators to resist the darkness. Linjiang's resident population was decreasing year by year. If this continued, it probably won't take long. Linjiang was about to become a dead city that had fallen into the dark world. Therefore, after knowing that he was not prepared to go to the big city to develop, the principal was obviously trying to beat around the bush. She wanted to see if he had any intention of staying in Linjiang. Although he asked this question, however, the principal did not have much hope. After all, Linjiang had been in dire straits these years. There was really nothing that could make Li Yueming stay. But in the next second, Li Yueming's answer made the principal jump up again. However, Li Yueming only thought for a moment before nodding his head and saying, "Sure, Linjiang is not bad either, but I have a few requests." Hearing that he was willing to stay, the principal pulled out his remaining hair. He wondered if there was something wrong with his head today. He finally came back to his senses. The principal looked excited. "If you have any requests, you can ask for them. As long as it's within your means, there's no problem." It was not easy to recruit a permanent reincarnator. And recruiting a permanent reincarnator with an initial score of S was even more impossible. It could be said that as long as Li Yueming was willing to settle down in Linjiang, Linjiang could satisfy any of his requests. "First, I personally don't like crowds, so I'll give the territory to a more remote area," Li Yueming pointed out. "Second, help me select a group of young citizens. Third, help me recruit a professional secretary. I want a very capable one." After saying that, "What do you think?" Li Yueming looked at him and said, "These requests aren't too much, right?" The principal was stunned for a long time before shaking his head. Not too much at all. It wasn't just not too much. It was as if he had no other requirements. For a moment, the principal wondered if he had forgotten to bring his brain when he went out today. Of course, Li Yueming knew that his request was not too much, so he said in a more serious tone, "Since it's not too much, then there must be no exaggeration." She could feel the coldness in his eyes. The principal patted his chest. "I'll handle these matters personally. I won't give any discounts. In addition, I will apply to the Linjiang Reincarnator Association to give you a subsidy of 50,000 reincarnation points per month. The number of reincarnators in Linjiang is relatively small, and our financial expenditure is limited. This is already the biggest bargaining chip I can offer." The principal was also an honest person. He didn't deny Li Yueming the treatment he deserved just because he didn't say anything. After handing over everything, the principal immediately went to handle the procedures. It was not easy for a super rookie to be willing to stay in Linjiang. If they didn't act quickly, Li Yueming would be intercepted by other forces. He probably had nowhere to cry. Regarding this, Li Yueming didn't continue worrying. He was prepared to go home and sort out his gains from this reincarnation. However, just as he was about to leave, he found a beautiful and sweet girl beside the stairs looking at him curiously. Li Yueming recognized him at a glance. She was the daughter of the current head of the Mu family, the top student and campus belle of Linjiang No. 2 Middle School, Mu Yu. She was the dream girl of countless boys in the school. However, there wasn't much interaction between Li Yueming and her. After all, before this, he was just an ordinary student with better grades. He felt Li Yueming's gaze on him. Mu Yu wrinkled her nose. He revealed a fierce expression. Li Yueming felt a little baffled. Thinking that he still had important matters to attend to, he ignored the young girl. He left without looking back. Looking at Li Yueming's back, Mu Yu opened her mouth several times, wanting to say something. But in the end, he could not say anything. After returning home, Li Yueming closed the door. After pulling down all the curtains, he opened his permanent reincarnator mark. Previously, 3-024 No, the will of planet 4-0241 had sent him a thank you gift. Because of the limited time, Li Yueming didn't have time to sign for it in the reincarnation space. She finally got out of the car. Li Yueming wanted to see what kind of local social the planets will had sent him. Imprint, retrieve the item from the mailbox. In the next second, the reincarnation mark emitted a burst of white light. After the light dissipated, a small fragment appeared in Li Yueming's hand. He sized her up for a long time. Even Li Yueming didn't know what it was. However, just as he was about to log into the reincarnator forum to see if there was any relevant information, a weak will came from the small fragment. "Hello, are you a reincarnator?" Li Yueming was shocked. He almost threw the fragment on the ground. He seemed to have sensed his intentions. The fragment's weak consciousness became much more nervous. It hurriedly said, "Be careful, don't fall. He's only a baby that's more than 580,000 years old." Li Yueming, concealment. 4-0241 What did the planets will give him? A 580,000-year-old baby. Why don't you go to heaven? It was as if she had once again felt the ridicule in his heart. "I'm only a few months old," the weak consciousness explained. Li Yueming didn't say anything. Instead, he picked up the fragment. He placed it under the light and took a good look. Under the illumination of the incandescent lamp, the shard emitted a colorful luster, like a pure crystal. But he stared at it for a long time. The fragment seemed to have turned into a super huge black hole. A light that could devour everything. This undoubtedly shocked Li Yueming. F***ck. Could this thing be a newly born world fragment? World fragments, as the name implied, were fragments that fell from a large world with complete rules. After leaving the mother, the small fragments absorbed the initial energy of the universe. If everything went smoothly, after countless years of evolution, a new world would be born. This thing was a treasure that the legendary top-notch reincarnators dreamed of. Not only could he create an exclusive small world suitable for cultivation according to the direction of his development, they could also grow all kinds of food and medicine that could not be grown in the main world. When it grew to a certain extent, it could even temporarily interfere with the rules of the reincarnation world. It was a priceless treasure. He felt Li Yueming's shock. The weak consciousness seemed very pleased and asked again, "That's Rick, I'm a newly born world fragment. So are your thighs thick enough? This Bayo doesn't want to work hard, I just want to find a thigh to lie flat on." He could feel the weak will coming from the fragment. He revealed a crazed smile on his face. "What about the babies at Kidian?" Chapter 43, Children are easy to raise. He looked at the shards of the world that shone with an alluring luster under the light. Li Yueming's face revealed an infatuated smile. He had already made up his mind. No matter what, he had to trick this 580-million-year-old baby into his hands. The smile on Li Yueming's face quickly disappeared. He put on a serious look and said, "Cough cough, you've found the right person. I'm the legendary chosen one." The blurry consciousness asked in confusion, "What is a chosen one? Are they the puppets that my mother plays with when she's bored?" Li Yueming's expression instantly stiffened. Good heavens! He was an existence that had gathered all the luck in the world. In front of the world's will, it was like a puppet. He felt that this guy was not easy to fool at all. Just as Li Yueming's mind was spinning, the blurry consciousness spoke. "Elle seemed to be a little hungry. Do you have anything delicious to eat?" Li Yueming suddenly had a flash of inspiration and said calmly, "What do you want to eat?" The consciousness pondered for a moment and said, "Is there no world source? I like the world origin the most." Hearing the words world origin, Li Yueming's face twitched. The so-called source of the world was the mass of original matter left behind after the world died. It contained the mysteries of the origin of all things and the rotation of heaven and earth. It was a divine treasure that only existed in legends. Not to mention that Li Yueming was only a small level 2 reincarnator. Even level 12 players were not qualified to touch such a treasure. Forget it. He still didn't want to raise it. Whoever wants this prodigal can take it. With such a big appetite, who would be able to feed him? Just as Li Yueming was about to throw the world fragment into the trash can, the blurry consciousness immediately became anxious. "It doesn't matter if you don't have the source of the world," she quickly corrected herself. "You can feed it some random things. It's easy to raise a child." Li Yueming, concealment. Looking at this shameless world fragment, Li Yueming suddenly felt as if he had jumped into a sinkhole. In the afternoon, the principal had already arranged everything. It could be seen that the principal had spent a lot of effort to choose a good place for Li Yueming. His territory was divided to the south of Linjiang City. Not far away from the territory was a local reincarnator family in Linjiang. Therefore, the corrosion of the dark power was not too serious. It allowed him to slack off without any scruples. Li Yueming was very satisfied. He immediately took his few pieces of clothing and rushed back to the territory. To ordinary people, after becoming a permanent reincarnator, you will be able to continue to live forever. One of the few things that he could decide on was choosing the Lord he liked. This was a two-way choice. The reincarnators would choose the commoners they needed to help them manage the land and assets in their territory. Ordinary people would choose those who were strong enough to provide protection. Moreover, the taxes were relatively less strict in the reincarnator's territory. Marry a wife, have children, settle down and start a family. However, there were too many ordinary people. The distance between the major cities was too far. Therefore, there were not many territories for ordinary people to choose from. According to Li Yueming's request, a considerable number of students from several schools in Linjiang City were assigned to Li Yueming's territory. In the following period of time, this group of people would arrive at the territory one after another. Of course, he didn't need to worry too much about the basic operations of the territory. There was a special team responsible for daily chores. Other than resisting the darkness, the reincarnators only needed to control the general direction of the territory's development. When Li Yueming came to the city lord's mansion with his bag, more than 20 beautiful women with graceful figures were standing at the door waiting for his arrival. After seeing Li Yueming, the group of women bowed to him. The leading woman said with a slightly nervous expression, "Respected Lord Reincarnator, this subordinate's name is Zhao Xia. We are all here to apply for the position of secretary." Li Yueming's gaze slowly swept across the group of women. The principal was really efficient. In less than half a day, how did he find so many secretaries? Moreover, weren't they all too good looking? Are you sure it's not a flower vase? I want a capable secretary, Li Yueming asked simply. A very capable one. So, which one of you thinks he's more capable? Hearing his fierce words, many applicants blushed. Only the girl named Zhao Xia took 2 deep breaths. Lord Reincarnator, I'm from the Zhao family. I've been nurtured in this area since I was young, and I'm very capable. Li Yueming glanced at her from head to toe. It was still pleasing to the eye. Hence, he nodded. In that case, it's you. The others can go back to where they came from. I don't care about food here. Li Yueming used the reincarnation imprint to give Zhao Xia a manager's employment letter. From now on, she was Li Yueming's personal secretary. Not only did they need to be responsible for his food and daily life, but they also needed to help him manage the territory. As for whether it was suitable or not, Li Yueming didn't think too much about it. Anyway, to him, if the secretary was not comfortable with it, he could just change it. There was no need to waste unnecessary time choosing here. Zhao Xia looked at the letter of appointment in her hand. He then looked at Li Yueming, who was walking away. My entire person is a little confused. The legendary S-rank reincarnator, his nerves seemed to be thicker. They entered the city. The first thing Li Yueming saw was a dilapidated place. He walked a little further in. One could see patches of black energy. A city without reincarnators guarding it was a paradise for dark energy. Zhao Xia was extremely nervous. The dark energy would erode the vitality of all living things. Even if it was just a trace of infection. It was also an unbearable price for ordinary people. Only reincarnators had the ability to dispel these annoying things. Zhao Xia could only follow closely behind Li Yueming, not daring to fall behind. He also prayed that he would be better and not be too unlucky. The two of them walked towards the center of the city. A pitch-black shadow suddenly darted out from the ruins of a dilapidated house. He charged at Zhao Xia, who was behind Li Yueming. The black shadow was very fast. Almost in an instant, he rushed into the shadow behind Zhao Xia. Zhao Xia herself did not know. Li Yueming felt the aura of the dark energy. He circulated his breathing technique. His fist slammed into the soil under his feet. Boom! A loud rumble came from the dilapidated territory. In the next second, a crack spurted out from the shadow behind Zhao Xia. Squeak, squeak, squeak. The black figure turned into an extremely strange human face. It twisted unwillingly for a while. However, in the end, it still turned into a wisp of black smoke under Li Yueming's overbearing fist wind. Only then did Zhao Xia turn around. When he saw the strange human face under his feet, he was shocked. His soul was almost scared out of his body. As a disciple of a reincarnator family, although Zhao Xia did not become a permanent reincarnator, she was still a reincarnator. However, regardless of knowledge or ability, the place of origin is in the world of the world. They were not something ordinary people could compare to. Therefore, she instantly recognized the name of the creature that attacked her. This thing was called the Dark Beast. It was a pure dark energy product. Any life that was contaminated by it would be assimilated into a part of the darkness for a very short period of time. And the one who attacked her just now, it should be a level 1 dark beast. In other words, if Li Yueming didn't make a move now, she was already dead. Zhao Xia, who had survived the disaster, did not have time to rejoice. Thank you, sir, for saving my life. If it weren't for you. Speaking of this, Zhao Xia's eyes suddenly widened. What had attacked her earlier was a level 1 dark beast. It should be very difficult for ordinary new reincarnators to deal with them. As for Li Yueming, who was also a new reincarnator. However, he only used one punch. It was destroyed in the physical sense. Such terrifying strength. Was this the unprecedented S-rank rookie king of Linjiang City? The excitement and shock in Zhao Xia's heart even surpassed the fear of being attacked just now. To be able to follow a powerful lord as a secretary, this was undoubtedly a great opportunity for her. Li Yueming put away his fist and patted the dirt off his body. All right, get up. Just work hard for me in the future. At this moment, the two of them had already arrived outside the mansion. Compared to the other places where the dark energy raged, the city lord's mansion was relatively clean. Zhao Xia began to clean the room. Meanwhile, Li Yueming strolled around the city lord's mansion. He cleaned up the dark energy. After confirming that there was no dark energy in the city lord's mansion, he was shocked. Li Yueming returned to his room and said to Zhao Xia, "This city has probably not been cleaned up for a long time, but I don't have time to clean it up yet. Don't leave the city lord's estate for the next 2 days. We'll talk after I enter the reincarnation world again." After he finished explaining everything, Li Yueming ignored Zhao Xia's shocked expression. After closing the door, he entered the reincarnation space again. Chapter 44, Reincarnator Forum, Novice Lightning Protection Guide. 1. He opened the reincarnation mark. He took out the transaction card that the principal had left for him. There were a total of 10,000 reincarnation points inside. To most ordinary reincarnators, this was already a considerable amount. Li Yueming rubbed the card with his fingers. He looked at the world fragment and asked, "Can you eat the reincarnation points?" The hazy consciousness in the world fragment was about to drool. "Of course. I can eat all the energy bodies that have substance. Please feed me." He heard an affirmative answer. Li Yueming held the transaction card that stored the reincarnation points in his hand and spun it a few times. The world fragment began to tremble. "It's not that I can't give it to you, but you can't eat it for free, right?" The blurry will seemed to be in a dilemma. After struggling for a moment, she said shyly, I can turn into your shape when I grow up." Li Yueming, concealment. Was this thing really the world will? Wasn't he too low class? 10,000 alpacas were galloping in his heart. He took 2 deep breaths. He would try feeding 10,000 reincarnation points first. After all, this was a world fragment that was known as a priceless treasure. He couldn't really throw it away like trash, right? He placed the transaction card next to the world fragment. Li Yueming instantly felt a terrifying suction force. He calmed down and took a look. The transaction card that was still by the table had disappeared. This guy even swallowed the transaction card that stored the reincarnation points. After the wind swept away the clouds, his blurry consciousness burped. Although the taste isn't very good, the energy is still very pure. As expected, Mom was right. How can working hard to evolve be more fragrant than hugging someone's thigh? Hearing this guy's nagging, he placed it under the light again and looked at it for a long time. I don't know, it's not an illusion. After absorbing the energy, the size of the world fragment seemed to have increased by a little. Feeling his gaze, the world fragment spread out a consciousness and enveloped Li Yueming. Li Yueming suddenly felt a space no larger than 10 cubic meters appear in his mind. The blurry world consciousness opened its mouth and said, "From now on, you will be my breeder. This space is a built-in space that I evolved. You can also understand it as the prototype of a new world. As long as there is enough feed, the new world will continue to expand. As a breeder, you have the right to use this space. You can adjust the world's parameters at will, such as temperature, climate, terrain, and so on. You can figure out more ways to use it. This Bayo is a little sleepy, so I'm going to lie down and sleep." He heard the message from the world fragment's consciousness. Li Yueming was constantly stunned. 10 cubic meters for 10,000 reincarnation points. Wasn't this house price too high? He thought of the heaven-defying function of this world fragment after it grew. The little unhappiness in Li Yueming's heart instantly disappeared. As far as he knew, after the world fragment grew to a certain level, it could even temporarily tear apart the spatial barrier of the reincarnation world. It could allow the reincarnators to take out some uncivilized big guys from the reincarnation world. For example, he could take out an immortal sword from the city's special ability world, or a Gatling gun from a low-level martial world. That scene. It was simply too interesting. These were still far away from him. With the current evolution level of this world fragment, it was impossible for it to tear space and compete with the world wills of other reincarnation worlds. He was still miles away. At present, the only function of the world fragment was probably to plant some flowers and plants. He would temporarily solve the problem of the world fragment. Soon, all the attention was drawn back. Now, he had officially become a permanent reincarnator, and he had accumulated nearly 280,000 reincarnation points. He was prepared to spend some money first. He wanted to buy some spiritual rice and spiritual rice seeds that contained spiritual chi and energy. He would plant it in the world fragment first. Generally speaking, powerful permanent simulations would not eat ordinary food, because ordinary food was not enough for them. Instead, they would choose to eat all kinds of high-grade spiritual rice produced in the spiritual fields of large factions. After eating the spiritual rice, it could provide the reincarnators with 10 times or 100 times more energy than ordinary food. It was a high-end food that was a necessity at home. This was because it was difficult to grow and produce. The price of spiritual rice was also relatively high. Ordinary simulations couldn't afford it. He probably only ate 2 or 3 meals a month. Only a super rookie like Li Yueming, who didn't lack money, would start buying spiritual rice right after the first round of reincarnation. He opened the reincarnator forum. Li Yueming wanted to see if there were any lightning protection posts. He was indeed rich, but he wasn't an innocent child. It was necessary to understand the market price before buying something. His consciousness had just sunk into the reincarnator forum. Li Yueming's worldview was instantly refreshed by the contents. Brothers, I met a fairy in the Xiangxia world yesterday. At that time, I thought I had found true love, but in the end, I found out that she was a sea king. Exposing a detestable drinker and inviting me to a restaurant for a meal. In the end, he cheated me of more than 10,000 reincarnation points. When he left, he even took off his F***ing pants. Ha ha ha, although it's a little unkind, I took a photo of Big Brother's naked butt upstairs yesterday. Those who want to see it will pay me 80. The front row is selling melon seeds, drinks, and mineral water. The melon seeds are grown in my family's spiritual fields. They're fragrant and sweet. The mineral water comes from the Xiangxia world. Every sip is filled with the taste of fairies. I even added more than 10 purebred wild wolf berries to the drinks. Wang Defa, you were the one who cheated on me last time, right? I'm already outside your territory. If you have the guts, come out and fight me one-on-one. I'll definitely give you a discount today. He swept his gaze over. There were countless gossips. There were also many merchants selling all kinds of strange items. Li Yueming was dazzled. All along, the impression that reincarnators left on ordinary people was more serious. However, he did not expect the difference between the two to be so great in the forum. However, after thinking about it carefully, Li Yueming was also relieved. After all, reincarnators were also humans. Just because they maintained their coldness in front of ordinary people did not mean that they would maintain their coldness in front of other reincarnators. In the end, it was just a different circle. He searched through the messy posts for a long time. Li Yueming finally saw a post that was useful to him. A guide to avoiding traps for newcomers and reincarnators. The name of the post was a reincarnator who claimed to be a newcomer's mentor. If you want to see this guide, you need to pay 500 reincarnation points. Li Yueming casually flipped through the comments below the post. Basically, all of them had good reviews. Therefore, Li Yueming spent 500 reincarnation points to buy one. He opened the guide. It recorded many things that new reincarnators needed to pay attention to. For example, many of the people who sold all kinds of items in the reincarnator forum were scammers. The lower the price, the easier it was to be cheated. If rookies wanted to buy things, it was best to go to the reincarnator shop. Although the things inside were about 10% more expensive than the ones outside, and they needed to pay 5% of the reincarnation mark's commission. However, they would not be deceived. The other was the preparations that needed to be made before entering the reincarnation world. For example, he could spend reincarnation points to buy a golden spoon. With a golden spoon in his mouth, he had a higher chance of reincarnating into a rich family. He could also spend reincarnation points to buy more detailed information about the reincarnation world. The guide to avoiding traps didn't really recommend ordinary newbies to buy these things. Born in a poor family, the difficulty of the simulation mark would be reduced accordingly. After all, it was even more difficult for the commoners to counterattack. He was born into a rich family. The difficulty of increasing the score with the simulated imprint would be relatively higher. After all, the children of wealthy families had a higher chance of making a name for themselves. In summary, the two cancelled each other out. It was useless to spend hundreds or thousands of reincarnation points to buy a rich birth. As for the details of the reincarnation world, the guide producers did not recommend ordinary reincarnators to buy it. This thing could indeed allow reincarnators to understand more of the basic rules of the reincarnation world in advance. However, the price-performance ratio was too low. Most of the information he bought was rubbish. The reincarnators could figure it out after living in the reincarnation world for a few years. In addition, after becoming a permanent reincarnator, reincarnators will lose the opportunity to choose their initial talent and will be replaced by the reincarnation mark. He could only choose whichever talent he drew. If there were really too many reincarnation points to spend, reincarnators could also choose to buy dice that could be used to reassign talents. However, that thing was so expensive that it was almost equivalent to the total amount of resources needed to complete a C-class world's reincarnation evaluation. Very few people would spend money to make themselves unhappy. That was why the permanent talent was so precious. In the end, the Lightning Protection Manual listed out a detailed list of prices. According to the records on the price list, newbie reincarnators would have a general understanding of the pricing of various resources. It seemed that the 500 reincarnation points were well spent. After figuring out the price of the spiritual rice and the spiritual rice seeds, Li Yueming opened the reincarnator shop and spent 6,000 reincarnation points to buy 500 caddies of spiritual rice and 10 caddies of spiritual rice seeds. The spiritual rice could replenish energy and fill one's stomach. After all, he hadn't had the time to eat after staying up all day. As for the remaining seeds, naturally, they were all planted in the fragment's small world. That damn world fragment had swallowed 10,000 reincarnation points today. Wouldn't it be a huge loss if he didn't quickly think of ways to squeeze it back? Chapter 45, The Second Life, Supreme Martial Artist. A new volume, 1. After paying the money, the seller's delivery efficiency was very high. It only took him 2 minutes to send the spiritual rice and spiritual rice seeds to Li Yueming's email. Li Yueming burped in satisfaction. This way, he could finally start his next reincarnation without worry. Although he had successfully become a permanent reincarnator, Li Yueming still did not dare to relax at all. After all, no matter when or where, only when one's fist was big enough was the eternal truth. Li Yueming said without hesitation, "Mark, start a new round of reincarnation." After a few seconds, The reincarnation mark on Li Yueming's wrist began to glow. A string of words was projected. Detected reincarnator name, Li Yueming, serial number 7001611. Remaining reincarnation authority, 5. Mark of reincarnation level, LV2, 1000/5000. Reincarnation points balance, 267,000. Origin power, 100 times talent enhancement. Fixed talent, 1. Do you want to purchase additional services? If he didn't need to click on the option, he could activate the reincarnation directly. It was indeed different from the last reincarnation. After obtaining the permanent reincarnation mark, Li Yueming could choose to purchase some additional special services. According to the author's train of thought of a guide for newcomers to avoiding, Li Yueming definitely wouldn't buy any extra services. However, as a cheating player, Li Yueming's way of thinking was a little different. It didn't matter to Li Yueming which family he was born in, as long as he could grow up smoothly. With unlimited deduction, he could definitely make a name for himself. He planned to buy information about the reincarnation world that was not worth mentioning in the eyes of ordinary reincarnators. This thing was undoubtedly a good thing in the hands of Li Yueming, who had unlimited deduction talent. It was enough for him to predict his future for a long time in advance. Do you want to spend 5,000 reincarnation points to buy information? He did not hesitate. Li Yueming immediately clicked on confirm. Suddenly, a huge amount of information entered Li Yueming's mind. Although he hadn't officially started reincarnation yet, he already had a rough understanding of the world he was about to go to. After all the information was entered, before he could finish digesting it, Li Yueming felt that he had gradually lost all his senses. A familiar soul came out of his body again. World loaded. World loaded successfully. Planet serial number 5-07312. The reincarnator is currently in the midst of a mystery in the womb. After the initial introduction, you can enter the reincarnation world. Introduction to the background of the reincarnation world. This is an extremely chaotic world. The world is divided into 3 continents, the Free Continent, Western Europe, and China's Central Continent. The races, cultures, and beliefs of the 3 continents are different, and their power systems are also different. 500 years ago, Long Tiankui, a martial arts genius from the central plains of Huaxia, was invincible in the world. He established a prosperous Great Xia dynasty on the land of Huaxia with absolute strength. From then on, China began to respect martial arts. 300 years later, the royal family of the Great Xia dynasty declined day by day. Coincidentally, there was a great drought. Years of disasters caused the people of the dynasty to live in poverty. With the rise of the great clans, the various reclusive clans and martial arts sects also appeared one after another. This is a sign that troubled times are about to arise. Reincarnation world background introduction completed. Randomly drawing talent. Congratulations on obtaining talent, Natural Warrior, Green. Natural Warrior, Green. You have a good talent in martial arts. You are born with your own unique understanding of martial arts techniques and moves. Starting from the 100-fold increase in origin energy talent, the effects of all your talents will be increased by 100 times. Your talent, Natural Fighter, has been enhanced by 100 times by the origin energy and has been transformed into a purple talent, Martial Deo Supreme. Supreme Martial Artist, Purple. You are a natural supreme martial artist. The speed at which you cultivate martial arts techniques and moves far exceeds that of ordinary people. The rules of this reincarnation world are level 2. Reincarnators can bring 2 talents into the reincarnation world. Will you bind talents, Martial Deo Supreme, Purple, Infinite Deduction, Gold? A series of information flashed across Li Yueming's retina. A natural-born warrior. Such a talent could be said to be tailor-made for martial arts. Unfortunately, the starting level was relatively low. There was only green. Even after the 100-fold increase in origin energy, he only obtained a purple talent. Fortunately, Li Yueming still had infinite deductions. The two talents complemented each other. The effect should be quite good when used. After fixing the talent, Li Yueming closed his eyes again. He packed up the information he had just bought. Then, he began to use his talent to deduce. What was worth mentioning was, when the deduction talent was activated, Li Yueming couldn't predict the future. Otherwise, there would be no end to the bug. Oh, years old, you were born in a border town near the northern coastal port of the Great Xia dynasty. Your grandfather is a small official in the coastal port, and your father is a well-known wealthy businessman in the town. However, you, who was born from a maidservant, were not very favored by father. 1 year old, you learned to walk and talk, but no one at home except your mother cares about you. You're the youngest young master in the family, and at the same time, you're also the young master with the least say. Other than giving you a few pitiful taels of silver every month, the residence doesn't care about you at all. 4 years old, you have shown an extraordinary martial arts foundation. You often practice boxing and martial arts alone in the courtyard. Years old, your father noticed your talent. He didn't care about you at first, but he hired a martial arts teacher for you. Years old, you easily defeated a martial artist teacher in a spar. Your extraordinary talent has finally attracted the attention of the whole family. When your grandfather heard the news, he even rushed home from the port. Years old, you are getting stronger and stronger after practicing martial arts all year round. Your existence makes your other brothers feel a huge threat. Years old, you casually took a few pastries to taste when you attended the party of the mayor. When you got home that night, you started to vomit blood. Before the doctor came, you were already on your last breath. Years old, your meridians are broken inch by inch, your martial arts talent is crippled, and you are once again recognized as a cripple in your family. Years old, I heard that there are Gokyudo pugilists from the Free State and Holy Fire missionaries from Western Europe who have landed at the port. It seems that they have clashed with the local martial arts gangs in the Central Plains. You don't know the exact situation, but since then, the family's business seems to have deteriorated a lot. Years old, you are unwilling to live your life like a coward. You want to put on a show of 30 years in the East and 30 years in the West, so you began to practice martial arts with all your might. Years old, you're dead. He looked at the 3 blood-red words in the deduction. He didn't expect that even though he had changed to a different world, he still hadn't lived past the threshold of 14 years old. He changed the data slightly. Li Yueming continued to try to deduce it a few times. The results were similar. As long as he showed the slightest threat, someone in the family would think of ways to get rid of him. There were few times that he could live to adulthood. They were just a bunch of punks. As long as Li Yueming wanted to. There were 10,000 ways to kill them with just a flick of his finger. As for the specific plan, it was better to wait until he officially entered the world. He had been reincarnated into such a strange mid-level martial world. It seemed quite interesting. Chapter 46, A Maiden Who Had Just Become a Mother. A baby boy was born in a border town called Gilu in the Great Xia dynasty. The boy was the 5th son of Li Fuxian, the head of the Li family in Gilu town. Logically speaking, it was a joyous occasion to have a new member. The Li family should be making a big fuss. In fact, the surrounding neighbors were already looking forward to it. The recent years had been getting more and more difficult. Many poor people did not even get to see a single meat dish in 10 days and half a month. Hence, the two of them were in a daze. Everyone wanted to take this opportunity to go to the Li family's house to eat a table full of fish and meat. Old Master Li did not seem to care much about his youngest son. Old Master Li only took time out of his busy schedule to take a look at the child when he was just born. Then, she forgot about this child. Not to mention the wedding banquet. Outsiders might not know, but everyone in the Li residence, including the servants, knew about it. One night, the old master was drunk and indulged in sex. In his thirst, he pushed down a servant girl in the residence. After he was done, he patted his butt and left. However, he never expected that things would be so coincidental. Not long after, the servant girl was found to be pregnant. He had no choice. Li Qiao could only reluctantly take the servant girl as his concubine. That was how the fifth young master was born. Under such circumstances, how could Li Qiao love the son that he picked up for free? It was already very good that he didn't ignore it. Li Yueming slowly opened his eyes. A few days after he was born, the mystery in his womb had ended. He slowly stretched his body. His gaze landed on his cheap mother in this life. It was also a pale-faced, emaciated woman. Moreover, he was no older than 18 years old. This cheap mother was too young to be able to play the role of a son at all. Just as Li Yueming was thinking about how to drink milk to make him look like a gentleman, the girl dragged her weak body and sat up on the bed. She looked at Li Yueming, who was neither crying nor making a fuss on the bed, with a complicated expression. There was a long silence. The girl suddenly hugged Li Yueming in her arms. She started to cry. A year ago, she was just a maid in the residence whose parents had died. At that time, she was still looking forward to a beautiful love. She hoped that it would be like the storytelling of the storyteller, where a handsome man would appear one day to save her from danger. The two of them eloped to the ends of the earth and fell in love together. But imagination was beautiful. Reality was cruel. She had become the mistress of the master overnight. She even gave birth to an unfavored son for him. Not only did he not feel a trace of warmth from the entire process, but he also did not feel a trace of warmth. On the contrary, he received countless looks of disdain. He thought of his future miserable fate. The girl even wanted to jump into the well and commit suicide. However, every time she saw the child in her arms, in the end, he still softened his heart. He hugged Li Yueming. The young girl, who had just become a mother, said with a gentle expression, Mom's life has been ruined, but you haven't. Don't worry, I'll definitely raise you and do my best to give you a beautiful life. The expression on the girl's face gradually became firm. However, none of Li Qiao's wives were easy to deal with. First, Madame's maiden family was from Qingdu City. His parents and brothers were all officials. Even Li Qiao had to take note of her expression. The second mistress's family was the daughter of the county head. Her family was powerful. Third mistress was also the daughter of a wealthy family. Only the fourth mistress was born slightly worse. However, it was also a slightly famous family in Gulu town. It could be said that no matter which room, they were not people that Li Yueming, who was born as a servant girl, could afford to offend. After Li Yueming was born, although the wives of several families were not too excessive, but in private, he had embarrassed his cheap mother a lot. When she was in confinement, she didn't even have anyone to take care of her. In the middle of winter, she had to go to the yard to fetch water to wash Li Yueming's diapers. His mother remained silent. Since no one was taking care of Li Yueming, she had to take care of him herself. No one sent her food, so she planted some vegetables in the yard to fill her stomach. He really couldn't live anymore. He ran to the front gate of the Li residence and cursed. Those ladies who cherished their feathers did not want to make a fool of themselves. He could only pinch his nose and give something. As time passed, everyone in the imperial residence was amazed by her strength. However, only Li Yueming, who had been with her day and night, knew how many times his cheap mother had hidden under the blanket and cried secretly. Time flew by. Under the careful care of his cheap mother, Li Yueming had successfully passed his first year in this world. On his first birthday. This was the first time Li Yueming met his deadbeat father in this world. The other party was a middle-aged man in his 30s. She had a big belly. Her face was full of bumps. It was no wonder that his cheap mother would always look at him with hatred. It was fine if an old cow ate young grass. After eating and drinking to his heart's content, he threw it aside and did not care. His conscience was really eaten by a dog. Facing the scumbag, Li Yueming felt that he was quite skilled. Unfortunately, he was too young to put it into action. In the second year, Li Yueming was 1 year old. He had already learned how to walk. However, because his body had not fully developed, he didn't even dare to exercise. After all, the bones of a child's body were too soft. If she exercised at this time, it might affect her growth. Li Yueming had no choice but to suppress his itching heart. They lay low and waited for an opportunity. Judging from the current situation, both mother and son were living quite miserably. Every month, he would occasionally receive some rations and monthly payment, plus some vegetables grown by his mother. He could barely ensure that he would not starve to death. It was funny. There was no place for them in the huge Li residence. Even the servants were living better lives than them. When he was 2 years old, Li Yueming started to run. As Li Fuxian's biological son, he was not favored. His identity was still slightly tougher than his cheap mother. The servants in the residence probably wouldn't even pay attention to his cheap mother if they saw her. However, when she saw Li Yueming, no matter what he thought, on the surface, he still had to respectfully address him as fifth young master. With this layer of identity to rely on, Li Yueming began to move around the Li residence. The range of activity was very limited. The school, the ancestral hall, and his cheapskate father's study. As well as Li Yueming, who was in the room of many concubines, they were all banned. However, Li Yueming was obviously not interested in those places. His target was the Li residence's library. He was still too young. There was a limit to what he could do. The one with the highest benefits was naturally studying. As long as he came into contact with the books in the library pavilion, by infinitely deducing the power of this golden talent, he could quickly learn a huge amount of knowledge. Chapter 47, 3 years in the East, 3 years in the West, Don't Bully the Young Poor, _L. The Li residence's library was located on the west side of the wing. It was quite a distance away from the courtyard where Li Yueming and his cheap mother lived. It wasn't easy for Li Yueming, who had a sensitive identity, to pass through several courtyards to read books in the library. Fortunately, Li Yueming was very patient. Every day, after helping his cheap mother with some work, he would run to the yard to play. In the beginning, there would be servants reporting the situation to the first and second branches of the family. After getting used to it, no one paid attention to it. After all, the identity of a child was naturally confusing. Darren might be wary of Darren. But to a little kid who was only 1 or 2 years old, it was probably just for fun. Of course, no one would realize that Li Yueming was doing this on purpose. After half a year of exploration, finally, when he was 1.5 years old, Li Yueming successfully expanded his range of activity to the mud pond outside the library pavilion. After playing with the mud alone, Li Yueming dragged his dirty body towards the library. The manager of the library looked at Li Yueming with a somewhat unconcealable disdain. There were a total of 5 young masters in the Li residence. Currently, only 3 were still in the residence. The other 2 had already left for school. The eldest young master of the Li residence was already 12 years old this year. Not to mention the handsome Wen Weiner, he was also an exceptional talent who cultivated both civil and martial arts. His strength had already reached the mid-stage martial apprentice. Even among the younger generation of the entire Clear Spring County, he was very famous. Second young master liked to read. At such a young age, she was chosen by a famous teacher in Kingdeport. In the future, he would definitely become a high-ranking official. The other two young masters were slightly inferior. However, they were all good-looking talents and would not tarnish the reputation of the Li residence. Only the youngest fifth young master in front of him. He wandered around like a mud monkey every day. He didn't look like a young master at all. It could only be said that he was indeed born by the servant. He didn't inherit any of old master's wise and mighty bloodline. Although he thought so in his heart. However, the steward's attitude on the surface was still very friendly. No matter how much Li Yueming was disliked at home. But they are also the blood of the old master. As a servant, as long as the steward's brain was not damaged, he would not make a face. It is a great taboo for a servant to deceive his master. Of course, the manager would not make such a low-level mistake. He bowed politely. The steward lowered his eyebrows and said, "Greetings, fifth young master. May I ask what is the matter?" Li Yueming's eyes were innocent. His tender finger pointed at the bookshelf behind the steward and said, "I want to play inside." The steward pondered for a moment. After thinking for a moment, he said, "This is the library, fifth young master. You're still young. Come and play again when you have the chance in the future." After all, the matriarch had already instructed him. Li Yueming was not allowed to come into contact with anything related to the family. Of course, the manager would not let Li Yueming enter the library pavilion. Li Yueming was not surprised at all. If he could enter the library so easily, he would not have to plan for so long. After hearing the manager's rejection, Li Yueming, who was already prepared, immediately began to make a scene. He rolled around. She was crying and wailing. The mud on his clothes was flying everywhere. It was unknown whether it was intentional or not, but many of them were thrown at the manager's face. The steward retched for a long time. The entire library pavilion was in chaos, and the surroundings were filled with splashing mud. Such a farce naturally attracted the attention of many people. Many servants heard the news and ran over to watch the show. When he saw Li Yueming lying on the ground like a scoundrel, they could not help but discuss in low voices. The manager's face darkened. If he could, he would have picked Li Yueming up and beaten him up. However, under everyone's watchful eyes, he couldn't do anything to Li Yueming. The crying attracted the attention of a youth in the library pavilion. The young man's name was Li Qiao. He was the third young master of the Li residence who was only 9 years old. After hearing the commotion, Li Qiao walked out of the room with a book in her hand like a little adult. He glanced at his little brother who was throwing a tantrum and rolling around on the ground, then glanced at the servants and maidservants who were whispering to each other. "What are you doing?" Li Qiao said angrily. Although the two of them rarely interacted with each other. However, they were still living under the same roof. Li Qiao had naturally heard of this half-brother. A few bastards that his mother often mentioned. Although Li Qiao was young. However, under the subtle influence of the power struggle in the Li residence. In some aspects, he was obviously more mature than the children of ordinary families. When he saw Li Yueming throwing a tantrum, his first reaction was to berate him. After all, he was still his brother in name. He was treated like a monkey by so many servants. As his brother, he was also flustered. After all, he wasn't the only one who lost face because of Li Yueming. And the face of all the Li family members. She heard his voice. Li Yueming raised his head and glanced at him. "Sob, sob, sob, I want to go inside and play." Li Qiao turned to the steward behind her and said, "If he wants to go in and play, can't we just let him in?" The steward's expression was a little stiff. To be honest, he really didn't expect things to turn out like this. He could only bite the bullet and say, "Third young master, how could this old servant dare to stop young master? This order was given by First Madam, so I dare not disobey it." When he heard the name First Madam, Li Qiao's face also revealed an awkward expression. However, at this moment, so many pairs of eyes were on him. Of course, Li Qiao couldn't back down. She could only bite the bullet and say, "Get someone to give him a bath and change his clothes. I'll talk to the auntie." The steward heaved a sigh of relief. "Yes, sir. I'll get it done immediately." The manager raised his head. He called over a few men who were still watching the show. 3 or 4 people gathered around. He carried Li Yueming, who was lying on the ground and pretending to be dead, down. After showering, Li Yueming finally got the right to enter the library pavilion to play. But as opposed to the opposite of the other, 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 the. He had also paid a small price. There were a few bruises on a few less obvious parts of her body. Although he had achieved his goal through unreasonable pestering. However, he was also warned and retaliated by several madams in the residence. Li Yueming's mouth twitched. He endured it? Who asked him to be a 3-year-old child now? What was the saying? 30 years in the east of the river, 30 years in the west of the river, do not bully young people poor. In Li Yueming's case, 30 years was too long, 3 years was more like it. At that time, this group of *T fellows would all pay the price for their actions today. After obtaining the authority to enter the library pavilion, Li Yueming didn't act rashly for the time being. After all, his actions this time had already attracted the attention of many people. According to the information in the deduction, if he was willing to be a useless person for the rest of his life, then the Li family might not be able to tolerate him. However, once he showed any signs of threat, the madam of the family wanted her descendants to have one less competitor to inherit the family property in the future. They would definitely get rid of him without hesitation. Until half a year later, Li Yueming was 3 years old. After confirming that there were no eyes watching him in the dark, he began to enter the library pavilion intermittently to play. Every time, he would play in the library pavilion for a while. When he was tired of playing, he would casually find a few books to read. In the manager's eyes, Li Yueming hadn't gone to school yet. He probably didn't even know how to read or write. It was impossible to learn anything. Li Yueming had unknowingly learned a lot of knowledge. Chapter 48, at the age of 6, his martial arts physique had just been formed, _L. According to the records in the Li Residence's library, Li Yueming learned more detailed information about this world. The Great Xia dynasty was respected for its martial arts. After so many years of inheritance, the culture of martial arts had already seeped into the minds and blood of all the Xia people. Although practicing literature could also get an official position. However, in terms of status, he was only able to carry the shoes of powerful martial artists. Under such circumstances, martial artists were divided into 6 levels: martial apprentice, martial master, martial king, martial grandmaster, martial emperor, and martial saint. Martial arts apprentices train their bodies. He trained every inch of his muscles with his tenacious will. Once trained to a certain level, one could possess unimaginable strength. In the end, a martial apprentice could split mountains and rocks with a single punch. According to the knowledge of the outside world. After reaching the realm of splitting mountains with one punch, a martial apprentice could be promoted to a higher level of martial master. A martial master focused on training a stream of inner qi. He learned a cultivation method to control inner qi and control the aura in his body to condense it. Through internal energy techniques, he guided it to circulate in his body. This way, not only could he widen his meridians, it could also continuously temper the martial artist's body. He had cultivated it to the great success realm. His inner qi was released more than 5 meters away from his body, and he could easily pierce through steel with his aura. Only then could it be considered as the final success. Then, he could advance to a higher level of martial king and start the next step of cultivation. A martial king needed to temper his bones and skin. Every inch of skin and every bone on his body was tempered to the extreme. It was tempered into an ultimate physique that could not be broken by iron or slashed by knives. They could transcend the scope of ordinary humans and possess an inhuman power that could uproot mountains. A martial king realm expert alone was an army. 1 against 100, 1 against 1,000 was nothing. As for the higher level martial arts grandmasters and martial arts saints, there were only a few martial artists of this level in the entire Great Xia Empire. Martial arts grandmasters might be fine. Usually, a second-rate sect would have at least 1 or 2 grandmasters. Martial emperors and martial saints were rare. It was truly a rare occurrence. Naturally, the Li family would not be able to come into contact with or understand it. After understanding all this, Li Yueming also had an idea. In his previous life, when he died, he was probably at most equivalent to this world's martial master realm. Indeed, the origin source laws evolved from different world sequences were also different. In the wasteland, even if Li Yueming tried his best to cultivate the breathing technique, when polished to the extreme, it was equivalent to the level of an ordinary passerby in the martial arts world. However, this didn't make Li Yueming feel defeated. Instead, it made him even more motivated. After all, the higher the level of the world's power, in the end, the energy that was returned to him would be stronger. Just this little benefit was enough to make him excited. 3 years later, Li Yueming began to train his body. There was no fixed training method for a martial apprentice. As long as one could break a mountain rock with one punch, they could become an official martial artist. Most sects had their own training methods. It could help the sect disciples reach the martial warrior realm faster. However, Li Yueming obviously didn't have such conditions. Fortunately, in his previous life, Li Yueming had created his own breathing technique. Coupled with the breathing technique, as well as the 2 high-level talents of infinite deduction and martial Dao Supreme, 1 gold and 1 purple, Li Yueming had opened up his conception and governor meridians. Many things were self-taught. He didn't need anyone to teach him anything. The only pity was that his current body was too young. He was afraid of hurting his own origin. Therefore, many times, Li Yu did not dare to squeeze too much. Ever since he started training, Li Yueming stopped walking around. He stayed in his own small courtyard and did not step out of it. In the beginning, his mother was very worried. After all, the child was still young. He should be at a lively and active age. How could he suddenly lock himself in his room? His mother found a booklet. On it were portraits of children playing with each other. There were even some words beside it. It was similar to a child's introductory storybook. His mother pointed at the portrait and said, "You, look, these children all have friends. Although your identity is special, you can't keep yourself locked in the courtyard, right?" Li Yueming took a glance. "Mom, do you know what this book is about?" His mother had been an orphan since she was young. If he really couldn't survive, he would sell himself to the Li residents to make a living. He only knew a few simple words. Naturally, he knew nothing about the words in the picture album. "What's the content?" he asked with a puzzled expression. Li Yueming hands behind his back as he said, Bal Qiang and Big Bear are good friends. One day, Bal Qiang went out to cut trees and asked Big Bear to help him look after the house. After cutting the tree, Bal Qiang found that Big Bear had stolen everything in his house, even the underwear that Grandma sewed. So the content of the booklet is to educate children not to trust anyone. His cheap mother was speechless. She looked down at the picture book. He then looked up at Li Yueming. After a long silence, he asked in bewilderment, Really? Of course it's true. Li Yueming laughed. Hearing his answer, his mother was even more confused. He frowned and thought for a moment. Suddenly, he asked, How can you read? Hearing this question, who knows? Li Yueming scratched his head. Maybe it's because I'm more talented. Of course, his mother didn't believe him. She picked up the booklet. He looked around the words on it. Finally, he pointed at a word and said, Then tell me, how do you pronounce this word? Mom. Li Yueming glanced at her and said, The word you're referring to means mother. Li Yueming added. His mother was stunned. After a long silence, he muttered softly, So this is the word ready? She finally believed that Li Yueming could read. He didn't know where Li Yueming learned it from. However, this was a great thing after all, so his mother naturally wouldn't ask about it. Li Yueming started to keep a low profile in his own courtyard. As a reincarnator, the most difficult period for him was the infant period. At this moment, his body had yet to fully develop. Even if Li Yueming was the reincarnation of an immortal, he would still be able to survive. There was no way to build a castle on such a young body. Basic training was still necessary. However, he had to be careful not to overdo it all at once. Since his mother found out that Li Yueming could read, she didn't stop him anymore. His son had a secret. As a mother who was close to her, she naturally knew. Unfortunately, she could only take care of Li Yueming's basic diet and daily life. She could only keep it a secret for him. In the blink of an eye, Li Yueming was 6 years old. In these 3 years, Li Yueming made a training plan based on his infinite deduction talent. Basically, the intensity of his daily exercise was at the edge of the limit that his body could withstand. Coupled with the talent of the martial Dao Supreme. Step by step, Li Yueming easily polished his body to an extremely exaggerated level. An ordinary martial apprentice would be able to brag about breaking a 200-kilogram boulder with a single punch. However, Li Yueming was only 6 years old. A punch could easily shatter a boulder weighing more than 500 kilograms. According to the system's original deduction, the system was executed. This year, his father would notice the martial arts talent he had shown. In fact, that was indeed the case. One day, when Li Yueming was practicing his squats in the yard, the big-bellied cheapskate dad happened to witness everything. Although he was just an ordinary person and did not understand the twists and turns of martial arts. However, even if he had never eaten pork, he had seen pigs run. There were a few guards around him who were martial apprentices. Thus, he still had the ability to see through him. When he saw the dense layer of sweat on Li Yueming's forehead, he was shocked. Li Fuxian was already a little surprised. After all, Li Yueming was just a child in his eyes. He had never received any systematic education since he was young. However, it was under such circumstances. Li Yueming actually knew how to polish his body. And he's working so hard. It was enough to prove that it was different from the others. He looked at Dal in the courtyard. Li Fuxian muttered to himself, Have I underestimated number 5 all these years? Should he hire a teacher to teach him martial arts? Such a considerate author, shouldn't everyone contribute more data? Chapter 49, Li Fuxian was furious, _L. He looked at Li Yueming, who had a determined expression on his face. Li Fuxian muttered to himself, Should we find a teacher for No? He had quite a few children. He didn't really care about one more or one less. That was why he was indifferent to Li Yueming and his mother. He saw Li Yueming training alone in the side courtyard. After 6 years, Li Fuxian finally noticed that he had a son. Li Fuxian decided to recruit a teacher for Li Yueming. After hearing this news, the other concubines at home naturally wouldn't do it. However, Li Fuxian was still the head of the Li family. After scolding the concubines, Li Fuxian found a martial apprentice at the peak of martial apprentice realm to teach Li Yueming martial arts. He also arranged for Li Yueming to go to the school in town to study and write after school started at the end of autumn. Li Yueming replied perfunctorily. Reading and writing were just a waste of his time. He didn't need to learn these messy things at all. As for learning martial arts, if the master he invited was a martial master, he might be interested. What the hell was with inviting a martial apprentice? Teach him how to exercise. When Li Fuxian held his hand and expressed his father's teachings, he wanted him to study hard with his master and strive to assist his brothers in the future and make more contributions to the Li family. At first, Li Yueming was a little patient. After that, she replied coldly that she didn't need it. Then, he turned around and left. Li Fuxian was left on the spot with an awkward expression. Although Li Yueming had directly rejected the idea of going to school. However, it was obvious that Li Fuxian's decision wouldn't be easily changed. He had to learn even if he wanted to. Don't want to learn? You have to learn it even if you press it. As the head of the family, Li Fuxian's words were like an imperial edict at home. Not to mention that Li Yueming was just a good-for-nothing son of his. The high-level martial apprentice teacher that Li Fuxian had hired for Li Yueming had officially arrived to teach. However, Li Yueming was too lazy to even leave the courtyard. A group of servants took turns to fight. In the end, he couldn't even open the door of Li Yueming's courtyard. Not to mention seeing Li Yueming in person. The high-level apprentice waited in the living room for 2 hours. In the end, he was so angry that he didn't even give face to the Li residents. The teacup shattered. He cursed in front of Li Fuxian. "L agreed to take in a disciple because I have some ties with your Li family. For this reason, I even specially came to visit you personally. In the end, you actually let a little kid fool me." TMS martial apprentice was a lecturer at TNE Umgahardar Martial Arts Hall. He had a good background and strength. Li Fuxian was scolded until his face was covered in dust. However, he did not even dare to fart. The Great Xia dynasty was no joke. The status of a martial artist was higher than that of an ordinary person, not to mention that the Li residence was the one who had been unkind from the beginning to the end. Li Fuxian was scolded for half an hour. When the other party left, in order not to offend the other party, Li Fuxian even took nearly 1,000 taels of silver before he managed to settle the matter. After the martial apprentice left, including Li Fuxian, the faces of everyone in the Li residence were extremely gloomy. Lady Wang was afraid that things weren't serious enough, so she added fuel to the fire. "Old master, look, I told you that fifth brother is a piece of mud that can't be helped, right? You won't believe it, but now it's great. I've offended Lord Wang of the Martial Arts Hall." The second mistress also said with a smile that was not a smile, "Yo, big sister, don't say that. Old master has high hopes for fifth brother." Third madam saw that Li Fuxian did not look too good. In the end, he did not dare to continue stimulating her. Li Fuxian's face was as black as a pot lid. Just now, he apologized again and again. In the end, he secretly stuffed nearly 1,000 taels of silver. In the end, he was still sprayed with saliva by the martial apprentice. The most important thing was, not only did he lose face from being scolded, he had even offended a martial artist who was on good terms with the Li family. This deal was a total loss. And the person who caused all of this to happen never showed his face at all. Li Fuxian wiped the spit off his face. He exploded. He grabbed the stool by his feet and said, "This little bastard is really a bastard. If I, Li Fuxian, don't punish him today, won't this bastard be lawless in the future?" Li Fuxian carried a stool. He rushed towards the side courtyard aggressively. He knew that Li Yueming would definitely have a problem with him as his father. However, he didn't expect Li Yueming to make him lose face in front of so many people. If he didn't vent his anger today, Li Fuxian estimated that his life would be shortened by 10 years. After watching Li Fuxian leave, the few madams in the courtyard all had gloating expressions. When he heard that Li Fuxian was going to hire a teacher for Li Yueming, they were really worried that Li Yueming would threaten their son's position if he grew up. However, he never expected this kid to be so ungrateful. Even martial artists dared to refuse to accept disciples. Was there a fool who didn't know what was good for him? Lady Wang tried her best to control her expression. "Do you want to come with me to take a look? Old master is so angry that his health is not good." The other 3 madams also stood up. Usually, they were very bored staying in the residence. It was rare to see a good show. Of course, they wouldn't miss it. When the 4 madams came to Li Yueming's courtyard to watch the show, Li Fuxian had already gathered all the servants in the Li residence. The servants held wooden sticks, stones, iron knives, and other items in their hands as weapons. They waited for Li Fuxian's order. They were ready to rush forward and knock down this small wooden door. He looked at the side courtyard that still had no movement. Li Fuxian gritted his teeth. "Little brat, if you don't come out, don't blame me for being rude." However, no matter how much he threatened and tempted her, there was no reply from the side courtyard. Li Fuxian instantly felt his heart trembling with anger. He looked at the tightly shut door. He finally lost his last bit of patience. He waved his hand angrily. "Go. Tear down this broken door. I want to see where this bastard can run to today." The servants, who had been waiting for a long time, rushed forward when they heard this. He waved all kinds of weapons in an attempt to push open the wooden door in one go. However, just as the servants were about to rush to the door of the side room, which was originally tightly shut, suddenly opened without any warning. He looked at the crowd of servants outside the door. "What do you want?" Li Yueming asked coldly. He saw that the door to the side room was already open. The servants stopped. After all, the order they received was to open the door to the side room. At this moment, Li Yueming opened the door himself. The group of servants heaved a sigh of relief. He looked at the indifferent Li Yueming. Li Fuxian was so furious that he had lost his mind. Taking 2 deep breaths, Li Fuxian said in exasperation, "What are you waiting for? Tie this dog up and send him to the ancestral hall. I, Li Fuxian, am going to cripple this unfilial son in front of my ancestor today." Chapter 50, Sweeping Through the Li Residence, Revised Version. Li Fuxian waved his hand. The servants immediately rushed towards Li Yueming like wolves and tigers. Li Yueming sneered. He had lived in this family for a few years. Li Yueming had been completely disappointed with this family that only cared about benefits and had no friendship. Previously, when Li Fuxian introduced him to the teachers, he thought that his cheap father suddenly had a conscience and wanted to compensate him. In the end, his words implied that he wanted Li Yueming to be a stepping stone for his eldest and second son. She had not considered him at all. Li Yueming rejected him directly. However, he never expected that. On the basis that he had clearly rejected Li Fuxian, this old thing, actually dared to invite the so-called martial apprentice master into the courtyard. He planned to force Li Yueming to learn. Don't blame Li Yueming for being merciless. A thin figure suddenly rushed out from behind Li Yueming. His cheap mother stood in front of him to protect him, holding a rusty kitchen knife tightly in her hand. He waved it a few times. He glared at her with bloodshot eyes and said fiercely, Who dares to touch my son? He saw a shiny kitchen knife. Many of the servants slowed down. After all, they were not stupid. They were just a group of workers who received a salary. Although women definitely couldn't stop them, if they were accidentally stabbed. That would not be worth it. The servants were really frightened by their cheap mother's fearless aura. She froze on the spot, hesitating and not daring to come any closer. Seizing this opportunity, his mother looked at Li Qiao, who was standing outside the crowd, and said hysterically, "Li Qiao, it's fine if you don't treat me as a human, but now you won't even let go of your own son? Even a vicious tiger doesn't eat its cubs. Are you even worse than a beast? If you touch my son, I swear I won't let you off even if I become a ghost." He looked at the hysterical woman with black hair. Li Qiao didn't say anything. Lady Wang suddenly laughed and said disdainfully, "Where did this crazy woman come from? You're just a servant girl. When you were starving to the point of death, the Li residence was kind enough to bring you back. In the end, you're eating and using the residence's food now, and you're even starting to devour your master." His mother bit her lip. His face was a little pale. However, he wisely ignored Lady Wang's mockery. His eyes were still fixed on Li Qiao. No matter what, the men still had the final say in the Li residence. In her opinion, all the decisions were in Li Qiao's hands. He felt her gaze. Li Qiao frowned but ignored her. Instead, he whispered to one of the guards, "Throw her corpse to the back of the mountain later. Remember to find a monk to release her." Li Qiao didn't have any extra feelings for Li Yueming and his cheap mother. Otherwise, he wouldn't have ignored the mother and son for 5 to 6 years. The guard nodded slightly to show that he understood. After giving his instructions, Li Qiao's expression was cold as he said, "Hurry up and charge. The first to charge at the front will be rewarded with 50 taels of silver." He heard that there was a reward. The servants finally had enough enthusiasm. They rushed towards the door. His cheap mother was trembling. It wasn't cowardice. It was not fear. Instead, it was hatred, deep hatred. The world was bleak. He was also desolate. In a situation where there was no power or influence, most of the time, a person's life seemed to be worse than a dog's. The so-called kinship was just a piece of paper thinner than paper. Attracted by the huge reward of 50 taels of silver, the servants did not care that they were just 2 orphans and widows who had no one to rely on. Anyway, he could just tie them up and sell them for money. Li Yueming naturally wouldn't stand on ceremony. He stretched out his hand and gently pulled. He easily pulled his thin and helpless mother behind him. Li Yueming gestured at her fist, which wasn't very big, and grinned, "All right, stop crying. Watch how your son beats them up." Li Yueming took a few steps forward and crossed the threshold. Then, he suddenly jumped up and rushed into the servants. Before anyone could come back to their senses, Li Yueming had already clenched his fists and punched out a few times. Bang bang bang. A muffled sound was heard. The 7 or 8 servants seemed to have suddenly bumped into a mud truck. He was sent flying a few meters away by his punch. He fell to the ground and did not know whether he was alive or dead. Watching Li Yueming approach to the office. Only then did the other servants wake up from their dreams. Someone subconsciously smashed his long stick at Li Yueming's back. Bang. There was another loud bang. The servant's entire arm was numb from the shock. The rod fell to the ground. However, this strike of his, Li Yueming was still unharmed. However, he saw a leg kicking at him. The servant subconsciously raised his hand to defend himself. However, before he could raise his arm, his chest had already caved in from the force of Li Yueming's kick. Suffering such a heavy blow, the servant instantly lay on the ground as dead as a doornail. Li Yueming didn't even look at him. He stood up and walked towards Li Qiao. All the servants on both sides would be killed by him in one blow. In the blink of an eye, more than half of the 40 to 50 servants in the Li residence were taken care of by Li Yueming. The remaining 7 or 8 fish that had escaped the net were so scared that they knelt on the ground and trembled. In the surroundings, whether it was Li Yueming's cheap mother or Li Fuxian himself, or some of the concubines who came here to watch the show, all of them were so shocked that their eyeballs popped out. God! A 6-year-old child actually beat up 40 to 50 adults. Was this world crazy, or were they crazy? But no matter what they think, Li Yueming's face was still expressionless. He patted the dust off his hands and walked through the pile of corpses. Li Yueming walked straight to Li Fuxian and said, "So what exactly do you want?" He could still smell the blood on the young man's body. Li Fuxian's face was pale, and cold sweat dripped down his face. Li Yueming didn't just kill a few dozen chickens. There were 40 to 50 people. How could a child who was not even 7 years old have such terrifying strength? He swallowed his saliva. Li Fuxian turned around and glanced at the 2 strong guards behind him. He noticed that there was no other abnormal expression on the guard's face other than a little surprise. Only then did he feel a little more confident. These 2 were martial artists that the Li family had spent a lot of money to recruit from the Kingdeport Martial Arts School. After all, the world was not peaceful these days. No matter whether it was traveling or traveling. Without the protection of an expert, he was just a 2-legged sheep in the eyes of the bandits and bandits. As long as a family had some power, they would go to the dojo to hire a few martial artists as guards. The guards who could follow Li Fuxian all year round. Naturally, they were all good martial apprentices, and they could smash a few 100 kilograms of rocks with a single punch. They had combat strength that ordinary people could not match. With the 2 of them as trump cards, Li Fuxian barely managed to maintain his composure on the surface. He said sternly, "Father didn't mean anything else. I just went through a lot of trouble to find you a master to teach you martial arts. Why are you not coming out?" It sounded like he was still questioning her. At this moment, Li Fuxian was already afraid. He looked at Li Yueming as if he was looking at a monster. A pair of eyes stared straight at him. She was being stared at by those eyes that were as calm as water. It was rare. Li Fuxian actually felt a sense of heaviness from Li Yueming's body. It was as if the person standing in front of him was not a 6-year-old youth. Instead, it was an incomparably heavy behemoth. After being stared at for a long time, Li Fuxian was scared silly. Her emotions were on the verge of collapse. Just as Li Fuxian was about to give in to the pressure and was about to cry and beg for mercy, the 2 martial apprentices behind Li Fuxian stood up. One of the muscular men sized up Li Yueming and said, "One didn't expect that a 6-year-old could develop such a strong body." As expected, heroes come from young people. Li Yueming's gaze also withdrew from Li Fuxian. In fact, Li Yueming didn't care about anyone in the Li residence at all. Whether they were dead or alive, they were just ant-like passers-by to him. As long as she didn't provoke him. The reason why she was holding onto Li Fuxian was because she wanted to get justice for her mother. After all, this scumbag wouldn't recognize anyone once he pulled up his pants. If he didn't teach him a deep lesson, wouldn't his cheap mother's grievances be in vain? Li Yueming was more interested in the 2 martial artists beside Li Fuxian. After all, his main mission in this world was to obtain power and influence. For a long time in the future, those martial artists who were at the peak were the opponents that Li Yueming really needed to understand. He casually crushed Li Fuxian's legs. He threw it on the ground like a dead dog. Li Yueming looked at the 2 martial artists and said, "Oh, may I know what the 2 of you need?" The muscular man looked at Li Fuxian, who was paralyzed. His expression immediately darkened. "Not really," he said with a smile. "I just want you to know that it's best to hide your sharpness before your fists are hard enough." The muscular man suddenly exerted strength from his waist. He kicked. This kick was made in anger, and it was very sharp and powerful. It could shatter a 250-kilogram boulder. After all, Li Yueming was still so ruthless to Li Fuxian even when the two of them had already stood up. To them, this was an extreme provocation. The strong man naturally wouldn't hold back. Just as the muscular man thought that Li Yueming was about to pay the price for his arrogance. What happened next shocked him. However, Li Yueming arrived first. His hands were like two iron pliers that grabbed his right leg. He directly relied on his bull-like body to forcefully receive his kick. On account of the author getting up early in the morning to edit the article, I beg everyone to give some feedback. After surviving the childhood period, the subsequent plot should be more enjoyable. Chapter 51, Duport Martial Arts School, QJNG Yun Sect. 1. In front of the two guards, Li Yueming directly broke Li Fuxian's legs. He didn't give her any face. It was enough to make the two martial saints furious. Although Li Yueming had also displayed extraordinary combat power in the battle just now, he was still a little weak. However, in their eyes, Li Yueming was not even 7 years old this year. No matter how monstrous he was. Under the circumstances where he didn't have any sect as his teacher, their strength should not be their match no matter what. However, what happened next really refreshed their worldview. However, Li Yueming quickly reached out and grabbed the muscular man's calf. The muscles in his entire body swelled in the next second. He actually withstood the huge explosive force of the strong man's feet. It forcefully broke his leg bones. Ah! The man's miserable cry resounded throughout the entire Li residence. He had thought that he would be able to win when he kicked just now. After all, he was just a little brat. With a kick, he would probably pee his pants immediately. However, he never expected that his leg would be fine when he kicked it, but when he retracted it, his leg could not return. Li Yueming broke his leg bones like a sugar cane. Only a layer of flesh was left. It looked very terrifying. Suffering such a heavy blow, the man instantly fell to the ground and hugged his broken calf, crying out in pain. He heard his incomparably miserable scream. Everyone in the Li residence could not help but feel a chill run down their spines. Many maids and servants who had not participated in this farce looked at the figure that looked like a god and a demon not far away. He couldn't help but tremble. So ruthless and cold. Was this still the mischievous and harmless fifth young master when he was young? It was simply unimaginable. At the side, the other short and fat man saw that his fellow disciple was defeated in the blink of an eye. An unprecedented fear instantly rose in his heart. One had to know that his level was not much different from his fellow disciple lying on the ground. The two of them sparred with each other and each had their own wins and losses. His fellow disciple couldn't even withstand a single move from Li Yueming. This meant that his outcome would not be any better if he fought Li Yueming. He looked at his fellow disciple who was rolling on the ground in pain. Dense beads of sweat appeared on the fat man's forehead. What kind of monster was this Li family's fifth young master? He was not even 7 years old, yet he had already cultivated such a terrifying body. What was the point of fighting? After finishing off one of the men, Li Yueming raised his head and looked at the short and fat man not far away. He was staring at her. The short and fat man subconsciously took 2 steps back. Li Yueming was no longer a 6-year-old child in front of him. Instead, it was a primeval beast. Li Yueming seemed to be ready to continue attacking. The short and fat man instantly cowered. He no longer dared to carry the arrogance of a martial artist. Li Yueming stopped in his tracks. He had heard of the Duport Martial Arts School. It was a secular force under the command of a second-rate sect called the Qingyun sect. Now, it was a chaotic time, and the world was in turmoil. Under such a situation where everyone was in danger, it was especially important to be able to learn martial arts. However, Not everyone had the qualifications and talent to enter the sect to cultivate martial arts. He wanted to enter the section. First of all, his martial arts talent was good. Secondly, the family conditions could not be too bad. The slightly more famous first-rate sects required their disciples' families to be at least at the level of an aristocratic family. After all, cultivating martial arts was both talented and wealthy. The humble class that relied on themselves to defy the heavens and change their fate were a minority. The conditions were so harsh. Naturally, there were very few descendants of aristocratic families who could satisfy both conditions. In order to make a name for themselves, it was also for the sake of earning more money, they would choose to set up dojos in prosperous towns. Those who were not qualified to enter the sect could settle for the next best thing and choose to enter the dojo to study. Among them, the extremely talented disciples even had the opportunity to make an exception and enter the sect behind the dojo. After nearly 100 years of development, the Great Xia Empire was now filled with dojos of various sizes. It was not difficult to see through this. The Great Xia Empire had long been firmly controlled by the various sects and clans. The power of the government was rapidly declining. The two people in front of Li Yueming were the instructors of the Qingduport martial arts school. His aptitude and background were probably average. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been reduced to being a bodyguard for a businessman. Li Yueming stopped. Looking at the man in front of her who was covered in cold sweat, she asked, "How strong is your dojo?" The short and fat man finally heaved a sigh of relief. He hurriedly said, "Young Master Qing, the strength of the Hong Kong martial arts dojo in Qingquan County can be ranked in the top 3. The owner is a martial master, and his strength is not bad." After thinking for a while, the short and fat man couldn't help but carefully glance at Li Yueming and say, "If you're interested in taking a seat, I can introduce the owner to you. With your talent, you'll probably be able to pass the sex assessment and enter the Blue Cloud sect in a few years." Li Yueming suddenly became interested. To the current him, there was nothing new about the life of an ordinary person. He could take this opportunity to test the waters of this world's martial artists. It was as if she had seen through his intentions. The short and fat man hurriedly struck while the iron was hot and said, "Young master, please forgive me. If you let me go, I can lead the way for you. In the future, I will follow your lead." The short and fat man was not only fat. He was also smart and tactful. Seeing that the situation was not good, they immediately raised their flags and surrendered. She turned around and even wanted to try hugging Li Yueming's thigh. Nonsense. The person in front of him was a 6-year-old high-level martial apprentice. If he could successfully grow up with such martial arts talent, in the future, he might be a giant thigh. If he could get close to her in advance, he might not have to think about problems for the rest of his life. As for Li Fuxian, who was that? I'm sorry. He didn't know. The relationship between the two parties was just an employment relationship. Moreover, this month's salary had not been paid yet. So what if Li Fuxian, that old bastard, was crippled? He looked at the earnest fatty in front of him. "What's your name?" Li Yueming asked. Now, he was only 6 years old. There were many things that were inconvenient for him to show his face. Taking in a clever underling could help him solve many troublesome problems. Therefore, Li Yueming had no reason to refuse. As for loyalty, Li Yueming never had to worry about his subordinates' loyalty. Hearing Li Yueming's words, the short and fat man was stunned, but he quickly came back to his senses. "I'm Wang Ma Zi. Young master, you can call me Wang or Ma Zi from now on." Wang Meizi. This name sounded like it had a lot of elements. Li Yueming glanced at him and pointed at the messy door. "Clean this place up. I don't want corpses everywhere in front of my house. Also, prepare a carriage for me as soon as possible." The horse and carriage must be the best. Wang Ermeizi immediately nodded and said, "Yes, sir. Give me some time. I guarantee that you will be satisfied." After giving instructions on these trivial matters, Li Yueming turned around and prepared to return to the side courtyard. His gaze inadvertently caught a glimpse of a few ladies not far away, whose faces had already turned pale. Daily tips, recommendation tickets, monthly tickets. Chapter 52, Heading to Green Harbor, 1. After explaining everything to Wang Ermeizi, Li Yueming turned around and prepared to return to the side hall to pack his things. After such a scene, it was obvious that he could not stay in the Li residence any longer. Fortunately, he was only 6 years old. However, his wings were already full. It was just the right time to leave this remote town and officially embark on a journey to defy the heavens and change fate. His gaze swept over the 4 ladies who were trembling with pale faces not far away. He then glanced at Li Fuxian, who was lying on the ground and peeing in his pants. He walked forward slowly and pointed at Li Fuxian. "Moms, you don't want to become like him, do you?" The 4 madams looked terrified. At this moment, Li Yueming was like a demon from hell in their eyes. It could choose to devour someone at any time. He looked at Li Yueming's cold gaze. The 4 madams shook their heads in unison. First madam swallowed a mouthful of saliva in front of Li Yueming. She was afraid that she would provoke Li Yueming and said carefully, "Fifth brother, we have something to say, let's talk things out." Li Yueming didn't give her the chance to play the emotional card. He interrupted her and said coldly, "I'll give you 2 choices now. First, I will personally cripple your legs." The madams looked at Li Fuxian, who was still twitching not far away. He then looked at the servants who had suffered heavy casualties. He was instantly scared out of his wits and cried, "Fifth brother, you can't do this." Li Yueming's face was cold. He was not moved at all. "Second, kneel down and apologize to my mother. If you are sincere enough, I can consider sparing your lives." Hearing this, the madams didn't have the time to cry. Li Yueming's coldness had already scared them out of their wits. As long as there was a glimmer of hope to save his life, the 4 of them did not hesitate. Hurriedly, he rushed to the entrance of the side hall and knelt down. "Xiaokui, you're a big man who doesn't hold grudges against me. Please be kind and spare us." His mother had yet to come to her senses. He looked at the madams kneeling in a row. After a long silence, he suddenly burst into laughter. He raised his palm. Suddenly, he gave her a few big slaps. Lady Wang's face instantly turned red and swollen. As he fought, his mother cursed, "How dare you deduct our monthly rations every month? How dare you order your servants to send us the food that we have searched for?" His cheap mother was really ruthless. Half of First Madam's face swelled up after 2 aggressive slaps. It was really well done. Li Yueming stopped Wang Ermeizi, who was busy cleaning up the blood. He pointed at his cheap mother not far away and said, "Watch out for me. If my mom is tired and still hasn't calmed down, it's your turn." Wang Ermeizi's face twitched. If he came, wouldn't he be sent to hell with 2 slaps? After instructing Wang Ermeizi to keep an eye on them, Li Yueming left without looking back. He had been raised by his cheap mother since he was young. There was no real relationship between him and the Li residents. In terms of kinship and bonds, to him, it was completely nonsense. The reason why he was so ruthless to Li Fuxian and the few madams, the biggest reason was that this family had ruined his mother's youth. After all, until now, the only person Li Yueming cared about in this world was his cheap mother. As a son, after Li Yueming's wings were fully grown, he naturally had to vent his anger on his cheap mother. As for the fate of the madams, Li Yueming didn't care at all. The future of the reincarnators was destined to be limited to a small Gulu town. To put it in a big way, Even the central plains of Huaxia might not be able to accommodate a flood dragon like him. Whether it was the Li family or the few madams, they were not even ants in Li. Why bother with a bunch of ants? Defying the heavens and changing fate successfully. When you were 6 years old, you trained your iron will and developed a super strong physique. You also successfully defeated all the servants of the Li residence and 2 personal guards of the martial apprentice realm. This time, the score of the reincarnation mark has increased slightly. Additional reward of 2,000 reincarnation points. Not long after he left, the voice of the reincarnation mark sounded in Li Yueming's ears. His actions today had completely overturned his tragic fate of being poisoned to death. The reward for the simulation mark was quite generous. It directly gave him 2,000 reincarnation points. This was the first time Li Yueming had changed his fate. The reincarnations points awarded for subsequent life changes would only increase exponentially on this basis. Li Yueming could not wait to stretch his wings and take a good look at this strange martial arts world. Li Yueming and his mother packed their luggage overnight. Wang Ermeizi also drove the carriage to the entrance of the folk prescription on time. He helped Li Yueming put his luggage into the back seat of the carriage. The 3 of them greeted the morning sun and quietly left this quiet town. Li Yueming's destination was Qingduport, which was more than 300 kilometers southeast of the town. Li Yueming was in a dilemma. His cheap mother stripped him of his clothes without any explanation. He then carefully gave a full-body checkup. After confirming that his son was unharmed, only then did his mother heave a sigh of relief. Everything that happened yesterday was more like a dream to her. However, regardless of whether Li Fuxian was crippled or not, or personally slap a few detestable ladies, everything was so real. As for her, as the person who should have understood Li Yueming the most, she had seen the side of her son that no one knew about. Swift and decisive, cold and ruthless. It was both familiar and unfamiliar. Fortunately, after a night of calm, now, his cheap mother had already accepted everything. After all, Li Yueming was a piece of meat that fell out of her stomach. Yesterday, he had even helped her vent her anger, allowing her to vent all the resentment and grievances that had been accumulated in her heart for many years. As for Li Yueming's other secrets, why would an uncultured woman like her pursue this matter? She only wanted to know that Li Yueming was her son. That was enough. He finally broke free from his mother's hand. Li Yueming blushed and put on his clothes. Fortunately, no one else saw this scene. Otherwise, his face as a reincarnator would probably be completely lost. Seeing this situation, his cheap mother smiled. "How old are you, a little kid? The earthworm is not even the size of a melon seed, and you already know how to be shy." Li Yueming's face darkened. He was rubbing salt in the wound. Too much. Outside the carriage, in order to get closer to Li Yueming, Wang Ermeizi took the initiative to introduce the current situation of Qingduport to him. According to his introduction, Li Yueming had gained a deeper understanding of the port. Qingduport was not worth mentioning in the Great Xia dynasty. However, in Clear Spring County, it was undoubtedly the largest port. Because of its natural and favorable geographical conditions, it was even more prosperous than the ordinary big cities in the inland. Almost all the second-rate sects in Qingyun County had opened dojos in Qingdu Harbor. This directly caused the presence of the government in Qingduport to be extremely thin. In addition, there were often many foreign ships docked at the port. Not to mention the merchant ships. Many of them were pirate ships that did not dare to stop at the big port for supplies. It was not only filled with pirates. They were also carrying many stowaways from other countries. The various forces in Qingduport were mixed together. There were all kinds of people. It was a famous chaotic place within a few hundred kilometers. Compared to being cultured and reasonable, in Qingduport, only a hard fist could speak. Daily tips, recommendation tickets, monthly votes. Those who like to watch can stay, and those who don't like to watch can go out and turn left. I didn't beg anyone to watch the whole time, nor did I ask you to pay a single cent. Don't mess with my mentality, or else I'll blacklist you all. Chapter 53, The World is Unequal, The Cruel Li _L. Along the way. With the help of Wang Ermei's information channel, Li learned a lot about King Duport. He drove the carriage and stopped all the way. Along the way, they also encountered many bandits who ran amok everywhere. However, after discovering that Wang Ermei was a martial artist, he was shocked. Most of the bandits gave up on the idea of attacking. After all, it was not a last resort. Bandits wouldn't go so far as to look for trouble and rob martial artists. The journey was filled with danger. About 2 days later, the three of them stopped outside a towering city wall. Li lifted the curtain of the carriage and glanced at the city wall. Where is this? Have we arrived at Qingdu Harbor? In front. Young master, Wang Ermei explained with a smile, this place is called Ligang City. After passing through Ligang City, we are less than 30 kilometers away from Qingdu Port. Under normal circumstances, martial artists would gather the latest information on Qingdu Port before entering the city. This way, they would not get into trouble when entering Qingdu Port. Wang Ermei understood Qingdu Port. However, the last time he came here was half a year ago. Given the level of chaos in Qingdu Port, half a year's time was more than enough for the forces of Qingdu Port to wash their hands. It was still very necessary to gather the latest information. He closed the curtain and closed his eyes. Then, he began to use his two top-grade talents, infinite deduction and martial Dao Supreme. He was trying to create a more powerful body tempering technique. Now, the strength of his physique had already reached a threshold. Normal training could no longer increase his physical strength. Li had been thinking about how to forge a new body forging technique along the way. He would strive to polish every inch of his muscles to perfection. Wang Ermei skillfully drove the carriage to the outskirts of the city. The so-called city was only slightly larger than Gulutown, with an additional 10-meter-tall city wall and dozens of untrained patrolling guards. However, compared to Gulutown, the population of Port City was much higher. There were hundreds of merchants and farmers queuing up to enter the city. Wang Ermei was riding on a tall horse, and behind him was a magnificent carriage. It was obvious that he was not an easy person to deal with. In fact, he did have the right to be arrogant. There was a special passage for martial artists outside the queue for ordinary people. After showing the token, Wang Ermei drove the carriage smoothly. Although the surrounding crowd had been cut off in such a high-profile manner. However, none of them dared to say anything. He could only lower his head and pretend that he did not see it. On the city gate not far away, many soldiers also saw this scene. Someone whistled. There's a big family here. Do you want to go and take a look? The captain guarding the door was obviously tempted at first. However, when they saw Wang Ermei, who was driving the carriage, enter the martial artist passageway, his expression changed. It was obvious that he was familiar with Wang Ermei. He put on a warm smile. The captain of the city guard rushed up and held the reins for Wang Ermei. Second Master Wang, it's been a while since you've come to our port city. Wang Ermei glanced at the captain guarding the door. How is it? Have you made a fortune recently? The captain gave a knowing expression, but he complained, hey, it's hard to be in this line of work. How can you make a fortune? Brother Wang, you're still the most dashing one. The two of them exchanged a few pleasantries. Wang Ermei took out a few taels of silver from his pocket and said, give me some face and help this brother find an inn with a good reputation recently. The extra money will be used as tea money. The captain looked at the silver taels with a greedy expression. However, he shook his head like a rattle drum. He rejected with all his might. "Brother Wang, you're treating me like an outsider. If there's anything you need my help with, just let me know. I wouldn't dare to take your money." Wang Ermeza was an outstanding martial apprentice. Although he wasn't doing particularly well. However, it was not someone the captain could afford to offend. If he wasn't wearing this armor, he probably didn't even have the right to call Wang Ermeza his brother. Naturally, he did not dare to accept Wang Ermeza's money. Wang Ermeza looked unhappy. If it was normal, he definitely wouldn't waste too much time with this guy. However, these 2 days were the trial period for him to run errands for Li Yueming. Therefore, everything is to seek stability for the above. He only wanted to leave the best first impression on Li Yueming. Just as the two of them were still exchanging pleasantries. At the foot of the city wall, a little girl of 3 or 4 years old rushed over with a broken bowl. Wang Ermeza didn't notice. He mustered up his courage and knocked on the wooden skeleton on the side of the carriage. He heard a sound. Li Yueming woke up from his deduction. He frowned and lifted the curtain. He saw a short and thin little girl in tattered clothes looking at him pitifully. Li Yueming glanced around. Soon, he noticed a scar-faced man not far from the city looking at them. Seeing this scene, Li Yueming suddenly understood. "What are you doing?" he asked patiently. The little girl raised the broken bowl and whispered, "Brother Roer's mother is dying soon. Can you send Roer some money to treat her mother?" Li Yueming was silent for a moment, but he did not refuse. "Wait a moment." He closed the curtain and took out a few taels of silver from his purse. He reached out and handed it to the little girl. "Take it." He did not give too much. It was probably enough to buy more than 10 sets of medicinal herbs. The little girl took the silver. Taking a few steps back, he knelt on the ground and kowtowed to the carriage. Then, she jogged back. He watched her leave. Then, he looked at the land that was filled with people. If things went as expected, that little girl was probably just an outpost sent by Scarface. It was to test the strength of their carriage. From the moment Li Yueming lifted the curtain, it was very likely that they had already been targeted as fat sheep. After all, other than Li Yueming, a 6-year-old child, and a young woman, there were no other adult men in the carriage. It was obvious that they were pushovers. The world is not peaceful, and bandits are rampant everywhere. Even martial artists. If one was not careful, there would be a bloody disaster in the cities around Kingdeport. Other than this small episode, everything else went smoothly. Under Wang Ermeza's arrangements, Li Yueming and the other two checked into a reputable inn in the evening. Immediately after, Wang Ermeza began to arrange food for him. Basically, they did not care about the cost. She picked the best and most expensive ones in the inn and sent them to him. He looked at the table full of sumptuous dishes. Li Yueming reached out and called Wang Ermeza over. Wang Ermeza was a little nervous. He was afraid that there would be any negligence or mistakes in his arrangements, and he was even more afraid that Li Yueming would expose his little idea of showing off. As a result, he lost the thigh that he had already hugged. Li Yueming could tell that he was nervous. She waved her hand to signal him to calm down. He picked up a piece of fresh and tender seafood and put it into his mouth. Although it was not particularly amazing in terms of taste. Fortunately, the fish meat itself was a top-notch ingredient shipped from Kingdeport. It was fresh and fragrant enough, and should be considered a very good delicacy in this world. They ate their food. Li Yueming asked unhurriedly, "Where is your hometown?" Wang Ermeza looked puzzled. Before Li Yueming opened his mouth, he had imagined 10,000 ways to ask. He also thought of many ways to answer the questions. However, he did not expect Li Yueming to ask where his hometown was. Confused, Wang Ermeza could only tell the truth. "Young master, my hometown is in Clear Spring Town. My family used to study. It was only in my generation that I switched to martial arts. Then do you think this world is fair? Li Yueming asked. Wang Ermeza was even more confused. He could only reply truthfully, this it's naturally unfair. Li Yueming smiled and didn't reply. Wang Ermeza looked like a thief, but he was still somewhat knowledgeable. It was just that he was better at disguising himself. At this moment, Li Yueming seemed to sigh. Young master, what does this problem that the government hasn't solved have to do with us martial artists? There are too many sufferings in the world. We can't manage them at all. How could Li Yueming not know this logic? He could only think of the little girl who was begging for her money during the day. Then, he looked at the table full of sumptuous dishes in front of him. Li Yueming no longer had the appetite to continue eating. Fortunately, he threw down his chopsticks and stood up. Forget it, this meal is tasteless. Let's go out and kill a few people. Wang Ermeza was speechless. After lamenting that the world was unfair, he had to kill a few people to liven things up. What kind of logic was this? This was too brutal. Chapter 54, A Straight Leg Through the Intestines. Looking at the sumptuous dishes on the table, Li Yueming did not have much appetite. He threw his chopsticks aside and stood up. I'm not eating anymore. Let's go out and kill some people. He looked at the murderous Li Yueming in front of him. Wang Ermeza felt numb. Big brother. Did he have to be so fierce? Wasn't it too irritable to kill someone without a word? But before he could react, Li Yueming had already stood up and pushed the door open. He couldn't stop it. Wang Ermeza could only brace himself and follow. When they passed by the inn's lobby, the waiter saw that the two of them were about to go out and specially instructed, "Sir, our port city is very chaotic at night. The officers don't even dare to interfere. If you must go out, you must be careful." Li Yueming nodded to indicate that he understood. After throwing a few silver coins to the waiter, he left with Wang Ermeza without looking back. The waiter sighed silently as he watched the two of them leave. Based on his experience in receiving guests all year round, he could tell that this was the case. The two people in front of him were obviously a master and a servant. This child was a down-and-out young master from some unknown place in the mainland. Did he think that Ligang City was just a small piece of land in front of his house? From a certain perspective, the port was actually a transit station for all kinds of goods in Qingde Port. It was responsible for the docking of supplies between the inland and the port. This was the hub of goods, and it was also one of the gathering places of the various large dock gangs. The security was only slightly better than Qingde Port. During the day, there might be a few soldiers patrolling the streets. However, when night fell, the yamen and the soldiers all closed their doors and disappeared. Under normal circumstances, very few people would go out at night. However, as a shop owner, the waiter had already kindly reminded him. As for whether Li Yueming listened or not, it was not within his scope of interference. The moment he stepped out of the inn, Li Yueming instantly felt that there seemed to be someone looking at them from the building opposite the inn. During the day, those guys had targeted the widow and her son. They even sent a few scouts to watch their every move. The only question now was how patient these guys were. Would they attack him directly in the city? He ignored the hidden sentries opposite him. After all, killing this stalker would not do Li Yueming any good other than alerting him. The two of them walked out along the street in front of the inn. Wang Ermeza was extremely nervous. They had only walked less than 500 meters. He could already feel no less than 5 waves of gazes staring at the two of them. 3 of them were martial artists. However, it was a little strange to see the two of them walking around at night. In the end, he did not choose to attack. However, after strolling around like this, sooner or later, someone would not be able to hold back and make a move. Wang Ermeza finally understood what it meant to be cruel. Wandering around in the middle of the night without sleeping. Was young master's fist already so hard? The two of them spent half an hour walking around the street. During this process, there were also a few ignorant hooligans who came out to cause trouble. However, Li Yueming didn't need to do anything. Wang Ermeize could easily deal with them. Li Yueming thought that those guys in the dark wouldn't attack him in the city. After all, there were many people in the city. Normally, it was not a good place to kill people and rob goods. However, when they passed by an alley, the fish that Li Yueming had been waiting for finally bit the hook. The scar-faced man who had been scouting outside the city during the day rushed into the alley with a few masked men in black. A group of men in black blocked Li Yueming and Wang Ermeize in the middle of the alley. Li Yueming smiled and said, "I thought I would have to spend more effort. It seems that I overestimated you." Hearing Li Yueming's words, Scarface's pupils contracted. He believed that there should not be any flaws in the process of scouting and tracking. Li Yueming's calmness was a little strange. Scarface quickly looked around, afraid that he had fallen into Li Yueming's trance. However, there was no abnormal movement in the surroundings after being nervous for a long time. Scarface finally came back to his senses. Li Yueming was a newcomer. How could they have set up an ambush in the city? Scarface pulled out his huge sword from his waist and said angrily, "Little bastard, you dare to trick your grandfather? It would be good to sell the ship to those foreigners later." According to his careful observation, Li Yueming was probably a descendant of a wealthy family who had escaped from the mainland. They must have done something wrong in the mainland, which was why the widow and the orphan had come to King du Port in a carriage to hide. Such a thing was not rare in King du Port. And these descendants all had a common characteristic. They were often very rich. In the eyes of a local gang like Scarface, these big dogs from other places were like super fat sheep that were at the mercy of others. Li Yueming didn't respond. Scarface suppressed the anger in his heart and waved his hand. "Brothers, be careful later. Don't hurt this young master." The men in black blocking both ends of the alley quickly rushed up. However, it was obvious that no one took the 6-year-old Li Yueming seriously. The targets of the men in black were all Wang Ermeize, who was a high-level martial apprentice not far away. After all, as long as they subdued Wang Ermeize, wouldn't Li Yueming, a pampered young master, be able to do whatever he wanted? Just as Wang Ermeize was about to grit his teeth and receive the attack, Li Yueming suddenly raised his leg and took the opportunity to kick diagonally upward. He kicked a man in black who was passing by him. At this moment, the man in black was completely focused on Wang Ermeize. Naturally, he was not prepared for Li Yueming's attack. Then, in the next second, he paid a heavy price for it. Pucci. Li Yueming's kick landed squarely on the man in black's abdomen. The huge force from the tip of his foot directly broke several ribs in the black-clothed man's chest and abdomen. And this was not the most terrifying part. The most hair-raising thing was that Li Yueming's toes were like knives. It directly pierced through the black-clothed man's entire chest and abdomen. This sudden scene shocked everyone except Wang Ermeize. The men in black all stopped in their tracks. He turned around and looked at everything in a daze. The alley was a dash. Everything became so quiet that a pin drop could be heard. Li Yueming lightly shook his toes. The black-clothed man who was kicked knelt on the ground, blood still flowing from the corner of his mouth. His eyes were still filled with confusion. It was obvious that even when he was on the verge of death, the man in black still did not understand what had happened. He retracted his leg. He looked at the remaining dozen or so men in black. Li Yueming's face revealed a rare excitement. It was not challenging for him to fight against a group of ordinary people in the Li residence. The weakest among the surrounding black-clothed men were martial apprentices. The leader, Scarface, was one of the best among the martial apprentices. He could use this opportunity to test the extent of his current combat strength. Li Yueming licked his lips. Don't just stand there. If you don't want to die, hurry up and attack together. Only then did the group of men in black wake up. He looked at Li Yueming, who was like a fierce tiger not far away. The expressions of many men in black changed. F***ck. Where did this kid come from? Chapter 55, Chapter 55, Outsiders who don't care about martial arts. 1. Chapter 55, Outsiders who don't care about martial arts. 1. In the alley. He looked at the blood on Li Yueming's toes. The members of the Iron Fist Brotherhood couldn't help but swallow. It was hard for them to imagine how this child, who looked less than 10 years old, did it. A kick had actually pierced through the chest of one of their gang members. No matter how stupid they were, he had already begun to feel that something was wrong. Although the child not far away was young, the aura emitted from his body was not small at all. He was like a ferocious tiger descending from the mountain. Scarface's expression turned serious as he looked at the calm Li Yueming. The rarely seen. Instead, he cupped his fists with his ring-shaped saber and said, "I didn't expect young hero to have such extraordinary skills at such a young age. May I ask where your master is?" "I am the leader of the Iron Fist Brotherhood, Ma Dongzi." Before he finished listening, Yu Mingming interrupted him. He waved his hand impatiently. "I don't have a master, and I don't have any background. Hurry up and continue fighting. If you continue to dawdle, don't blame me for being rude." The martial world was not about fighting and killing. The martial world was about the ways of the world. Of course, Li Yueming also understood this logic. However, as an outsider, Li Yueming was obviously not going to abide by this rule. Scarface was speechless. This kid didn't play by the rules. Seeing that there was no room for negotiation, Scarface finally stopped being distracted. The vicious aura on his body was also stimulated. The countless days of licking blood on the blade were not in vain. He raised his broadsword and gave his brothers a look. All the men in black drew their weapons. He suddenly pounced towards Li Yueming. Li Yueming lifted his leg. He grabbed the saber on the waist of the man in black on the ground. A black shadow pounced over. Li Yueming unsheathed his saber. In the next second, ding, 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 chiang. Sparks kept flashing. The sound of several weapons colliding could be heard. Li Yueming was blocked by 4 long blades. One side defended while the other attacked. Li Yueming supported himself with his arms to prevent the blades from falling. In contrast, the 4 men in black from the Iron Fist Brotherhood were also doing their best to slash down. It was a stalemate for a moment. The members of the Iron Fist Brotherhood were even more shocked. One had to know that the 4 of them were working together now. Li Yueming was just a person with a knife. But even so. However, he still managed to block the 4 of them's fatal attacks. Without a doubt, the opponent's physical fitness was so strong that he did not seem like an ordinary martial apprentice. This kind of power, perhaps only martial masters who had condensed their inner chi could match him. The thought of the child in front of him being a 6-year-old prospective martial master. The members of the Iron Fist Brotherhood didn't even know whether they were crazy or the world was crazy. The few of them could tell that Ming Li couldn't hold on much longer. After all, no matter how strong he was, it was impossible for him to withstand the full force attacks of 4 adult martial apprentices on his own. One had to know that the Brotherhood Alliance had sent more than 4 people this time. As long as he could restrain Li Yueming, the following battle lost its suspense. The gang leader, Scarface, also rushed over. The ring-shaped broadsword drew an arc in the air. The cold blade light slashed fiercely towards Li Yueming. Scarface shouted as he exerted his strength, "Slash!" Seeing this situation, Li Yueming's expression finally turned serious. For his current 6-year-old body, it was indeed very difficult for him to withstand the attacks of an adult martial artist. As the battle gradually entered its state, Li Yueming had also released all his restraints. While fighting, Li Yueming began to use infinite deduction and his supreme martial arts talent to condense his moves and combat techniques. In the previous sequence 3 Wasteland World, Li Yueming spent most of his energy on deducing the breathing technique. In battle, he would also rely on his breathing technique and powerful physique to suppress them. He had never really honed his combat skills. He wanted to achieve unparalleled achievements in this world of martial arts. Li Yueming had to strengthen every inch of his martial arts foundation. The breathing technique began to operate at full force. Every pore on Li Yueming's body was opened, and he was breathing in the oxygen in the air. He looked at the ring-shaped saber that was getting closer and closer to him. Li Yueming used his full strength to unleash his superclass. He suddenly sent the 4 sabers that were restraining him flying. He flicked the long saber in his hand. Instantly, the ring-shaped broadsword in Scarface's hand was pushed away by 2 inches, and he dodged the fatal attack by a hair's breadth. Scarface didn't have time to change his posture. Li Yueming was already prepared. The hilt of the saber suddenly knocked down. It struck the back of Scarface's hand at lightning speed. Under the pain, Scarface could only let go of the ring-shaped broadsword in his hand. Li Yueming didn't stand on ceremony. He kicked him into the air. Then, he stomped his foot. Scarface, who had been hit by a second company, was smashed to the ground like a cannonball. Even if he didn't die, he probably wouldn't live for long. There were also a few members of the Iron Blood Brotherhood who charged towards Li Yueming. Li Yueming didn't even blink. He suddenly rushed out from where he was. The arc drawn by the long saber was elegant and gorgeous. The few Brotherhood members who met him were beheaded in the blink of an eye. His head fell to the ground. Blood started to spurt out crazily. The supreme martial artist talent could increase Li Yueming's comprehension speed of martial arts techniques and moves. In addition, he could also predict the enemy's attack method and direction of force at any time. It could be said that without the interference of a higher level of power, the situation would be different. Li Yueming was an undefeatable god of war in a battle of the same level. The alleyway was dyed red. The members of the Iron Fist Brotherhood who thought that they were in a good situation were so scared that they wet their pants. Even if their heads were split open. They couldn't imagine how powerful Li Yueming was. Li Yueming walked past them with the scarred face's ring-shaped broadsword in hand. After taking a glance, he did not continue to kill. He went straight to the scar-faced man who had fallen to the ground and had yet to get up. She placed the bloody saber against his neck and said coldly, "Where's the little girl from this afternoon?" He looked at the long saber on his neck. Scarface struggled to get up. Li Yueming looked down at him. He did not stop them. Before he activated the breathing technique, Li Yueming could already kick someone's intestines. After activating the breathing technique, Li Yueming's bodily functions increased exponentially. Even if Scarface's physical condition was much stronger than that member's. However, there was definitely no way for him to resist it with his physical body. Li Yueming was already merciful enough that he didn't smash Scarface into pieces. Scarface naturally couldn't fight back. He tried a few times. After realizing that he could not get up no matter what, Scarface accepted his fate. Lying on the ground, he coughed out a few mouthfuls of blood. "You're a foreigner who doesn't care about martial arts. Sooner or later, you'll be attacked by a group of people." Scarface knew that he would not survive. Therefore, he didn't give Li Yueming any face at all. Li Yueming immediately raised his hand and slashed down, giving him a quick death. Then, he turned around and looked at the remaining 4 members of the Iron Fist Brotherhood. He did not speak. However, his murderous look still made people shudder. She looked at the long saber in his hand that was still emitting steam. The remaining few people could not help but swallow their saliva. They trembled and said, big brother, If you have anything to ask, just ask. We will tell you everything we know. I can't say enough. One had to know that this group of sect members were the ones who licked blood all year round. But now, she was scared by a child like Li Yueming. One could imagine how powerful Li Yueming was at this moment. Chapter 56, Massacring the Iron Fist Brotherhood. He looked at the trembling people in front of him. Who are you? Li Yueming asked. After hearing the question. We're members of the Iron Fist Brotherhood's branch in the port city, one of them said hurriedly. The scar-faced man just now is called Ma Dongzi. He's the leader of our port city branch. Hearing the word brotherhood, Li Yueming's face revealed a look of realization. Li Yueming had also asked around for some information in the city. The Brotherhood of Departure was very famous in the towns and villages around the city. Transportation, going out to sea, burning, killing, and looting. The members of this gang would do whatever they could to earn money. He could be considered a model of bullying men and women. The government had once sent troops to wipe out a stronghold of the Iron Fist Brotherhood. The next day, the county magistrate's head was hung on the city wall. She didn't even let go of the pregnant rat at the door. One could imagine how arrogant they were. The other gangs around Kingdeport had similar styles as the Iron Fist Brotherhood. There were only a few sects that were considered to be more ethical. According to Wang Ermeize, it was as if there were various sects behind the dojos that opened everywhere. Behind the gang were the aristocratic families from all over China. It could be considered the white gloves used by those aristocratic families. Li Yueming was no longer interested in asking. Where's the little girl you sent today? He asked, changing the topic. To the little girl from before. For some reason, Li Yueming was very concerned. To him, a reincarnator. Under normal circumstances, the only existence that could make him feel special was the native child of destiny of the reincarnation world. The so-called children of fate were creatures that were favored by the consciousness of the world. They could be humans, animals, or even items. It was born with a specific mission. Therefore, if one could bring the Son of Destiny to their side, the reincarnator could be infected with the characteristics of the Son of Destiny to a certain extent. Li Yueming's unlikable behavior in this world might not be so despised by the world's will. There were many benefits. Therefore, Li Yueming naturally wouldn't miss this opportunity. A few Brotherhood members opened their mouths and hesitated. Li Yueming's response was simple. He raised his ring-shaped broadsword and swung it lightly. Immediately, another head fell to the ground. Their psychological defenses had completely collapsed. That group of children has already been sent to Kingdeport overnight today, he confessed. They'll probably be sold to the Free State as slaves. Li Yueming's face instantly fell. When he lifted the curtain earlier. Actually, he already felt that it was a little strange. He only came back to his senses when it was time to eat. He didn't expect that in just a few hours, the girl named Xiaoro would be sent to Kingdeport. Today? Li Yueming asked. A few Brotherhood members had already collapsed at this moment. They did not resist at all and said, after those children are sent over, they will have to be appraised. The better ones will even be auctioned off, therefore, it shouldn't be so fast. A normal child would only be sold after 2 or 3 days. He looked at Wang Ermeize, who was still in a daze not far away. He casually threw the long saber into his hand. He walked out of the alley. When they returned to the inn, the waiter was still checking the account books left in the daytime. She subconsciously looked up when she heard the knock on the door. This glance almost scared him out of his wits. He sized up Li Yueming for a long time. He finally recognized Li Yueming. Wasn't this the young master from before? It had only been less than 2 hours. He was educated by the local gangs in Ligong City. He looked at the bloodstains all over his body. The waiter couldn't help but sigh. Sigh, customer, why do you think you're going out in the middle of the night? I've already reminded you that it's not peaceful at night in Ligong City. The waiter stood up and asked, do you want me to help you get a doctor to treat your injuries? However, they had agreed that the cost of hiring a doctor at night would be 5 times higher than during the day. The waiter thought that Li Yueming had escaped after being robbed. Looking at the bloodstains all over his body, he must have suffered a lot of injuries. That was why she was so kind as to call a doctor for him. As an inn that could continue to operate steadily in the city, it was not a bad idea. Of course, the waiter had a certain background. Ordinary sects did not dare to cause trouble near the inn. However, to his surprise, Li Yueming casually waved his hand and said, no, thank you for your kindness. Li Yueming took out a few silver coins from his pocket and said, "Ls, there's still hot water? I want to take a shower and change my clothes." The waiter was speechless. He looked at Li Yueming from head to toe. After making sure that Li Yueming was not out of his mind, he said, "Sir, you're still bleeding. Why don't you call a doctor? If you die here, it will affect the reputation of the inn." Li Yueming raised his hand to take a look. He realized that his arm really did seem to be dripping blood. After a careful examination, he said, "Oh, this blood is not mine. I'm really fine. Don't worry." Seeing that he didn't care at all, the waiter finally stopped talking. However, the way he looked at Li Yueming was still shocking. He took the silver. He brought Li Yueming to the bathroom door. After that, the waiter left. Before she could even sigh when she returned to the counter. However, another bloody figure appeared at the door of the guest room. Wang Ermeza casually entered the inn and said to the waiter, "Boss, is my young master back yet?" The waiter sized him up. It wasn't easy for him to recognize her. "Oh, she's taking a shower," she said mechanically. Wang Ermeza paused. His voice couldn't help but become much softer. "Are there any other places to bathe?" "I want to bathe too," she said quietly. The waiter was numb. Even though he was used to seeing all kinds of strange things in this port city. However, this was the first time he had seen such a scene. It was simply an eye-opener for him. "Are you sure you don't want to find a doctor first?" Wang Ermeza raised his eyebrows. "What are you talking about? How can I be at a disadvantage if I follow young master? Hurry up and get me a bucket of water to take a bath. The blood of this damn Iron Fist Brotherhood stinks." Li Yueming changed his clothes and returned to the guest room. After finding a place to sit down, he closed his eyes and continued to comprehend the gains from these battles. Just now, he and Wang Ermezi had split up and killed more than half of the members of the Iron Fist Brotherhood's departure branch. Li Yueming was the one who had bitten off the hard bone. VV Yukt 1 L Vili I Sen Love Level and L 1 Euro ES Cilia people. After more than 2 hours, they had killed a lot of people in the city. Such a high-intensity battle. It was undoubtedly a huge improvement for Li Yueming. With the help of the deduction system and the supreme constitution of martial arts, Li Yueming's combat strength had increased by 30% after several battles. All kinds of battle awareness and experience were added. Li Yueming had some enlightenment in the middle of the battle. He seemed to know how to polish his body to the most perfect peak state. This bloody massacre had caused a huge commotion. The news of the Iron Fist Brotherhood being massacred would probably spread throughout the streets and alleys of the city. Information about him would likely be dug out by various factions. However, this had nothing to do with Li Yueming. He had already decided to leave for Qingdu the next morning. After all, if the little girl was really the child of destiny, bringing her along would be of great help to him in changing his fate. Of course, Li Yueming couldn't be indifferent to such an important help. He was already amazed by the chaos in Port City. What kind of surprise would Qingdu Harbor, which was even more chaotic than the city, bring him? Li Yueming was curious. At the end of the month, He had to take back the monthly and recommendation tickets that no one wanted at a high price. Chapter 57, The Great Hero of Ligong City. He had digested all the experience he had gained from the battle that night. Li Yueming glanced at the sky outside the window. Although it was still dark. However, the sound of porters and carriages could already be heard on the street outside the inn. Most of the fishermen in Qingduport went out to sea to catch fish in the early hours of the morning. They would drive their fishing boats back to land at dawn. The word fresh was very important for seafood. The fish that were fished up in the middle of the night would be loaded onto carriages and sent inland as soon as they reached the shore. Now that he heard the sound of the carriage, it meant that dawn was not far away. Li Yueming closed his eyes and rested for a while. Fortunately, his current physical fitness was already extraordinary. He didn't care if he had to endure for a day or two. Wang Ermeize eagerly fetched a bucket of water and knocked on Li Yueming's door. He took the towel and washed his face. "Is my mom awake?" Li Yueming asked. "Young master, madam is awake. She's washing up now," Wang Ermeize said with a submissive expression. After the battle last night. Now, Wang Ermeize had completely accepted his identity as a servant, both mentally and physically. He even felt a little proud of it. Even though Li Yueming was only 6 years old, the strength he displayed was no less than that of an ordinary martial master. A 6-year-old prospective martial master. What kind of concept was this? Following such a boss wasn't better than him not being able to eat a mouthful of warm incense even if he went out to eat shit. Hearing his answer, Li Yueming stood up and said, "Then let's set off as soon as possible." Wang Ermeize looked a little conflicted. After hesitating for a long time, he finally said, "We just destroyed a branch of the Iron Fist Brotherhood yesterday. Today, we're going to the headquarters of Qingduport. Is this really okay?" Li Yueming waved his hand. "If I stay here, I'll be found sooner or later. It doesn't matter whether it's earlier or later." Wang Ermeize thought about it. Based on the combat strength that Li Yueming had displayed last night. Even if the Iron Fist Brotherhood took revenge on them. As long as they weren't surrounded by their main forces, there shouldn't be too much of a problem. After thinking through everything, Wang Ermeize nodded. Young master is right. No matter how powerful the Iron Fist Brotherhood is, it's just an idle gang. As long as young master successfully joins the dojo, they won't dare to fart when they see us in the future. Under normal circumstances, the city gates of the inland cities should open around 6 in the morning. However, as a coastal city, the city gates were already wide open at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. Port cities like Qingduport were even more exaggerated. It was said that many times, the city gates were not closed 24 hours a day. About 15 minutes later, the three of them packed their luggage and went to the guest room. The waiter had already changed shifts. At this moment, the innkeeper was in charge of the counter. The moment he saw them come down, the steward sized them up and then beamed with joy. "Customer, are you checking out? The horse must have fed enough grass, right?" Wang Ermeize said impatiently. The shopkeeper nodded. "We fed you the best fodder. We even trimmed your hooves and reinforced the hoof nails." Wang Ermeize was slightly satisfied after hearing this. The shopkeeper took out the deposit for the three of them from the counter. "Three masters, something big happened in the city last night. Did you know?" Li Yueming and Wang Ermeize's expressions didn't change much. The commotion last night was indeed very big. It was impossible to not be discovered. It was precisely because he didn't want to get into too much trouble here that Li Yueming prepared to leave the city early in the morning. However, they had clearly underestimated the speed of information transmission. The sky was still dark. Even the innkeeper had heard the news. Seeing that the two of them were silent, the shopkeeper did not continue asking. After all, it didn't matter what Li Yueming and the others did. As long as they paid the room fee, the inn would not have much to do with them. The reason why he mentioned it was because it was just a reminder to the two of them. Li Yueming also understood the insinuation of the shopkeeper. "Shopkeeper, can we leave the city now?" Li Yueming asked tentatively. The shopkeeper glanced at Li Yueming but didn't say anything. Beside him, Wang Ermeza thoughtfully placed 2 pieces of silver. The shopkeeper then continued, "Of course, we can leave the city. After all, the government and the gangs are not on the same side. However, the Iron Fist Brotherhood is notorious and committed all kinds of crimes. They have quite a bit of power around Qingdu Port. Are the 3 masters going to Qingdu Port? Then you have to be careful," the shopkeeper reminded. "Qingdu Port is the headquarters of the Iron Fist Brotherhood. I heard that there are martial masters guarding it." "Thank you for your reminder, shopkeeper. We will be careful," Li Yueming said with a smile. To him, as long as he could leave the city, other threats were not a problem. The shopkeeper nodded. After putting away the silver pieces on the counter, he went back to his work. The 3 of them came to the stables from the side door. The waiter in charge of the stable helped them feed the horses one last time. The few of them left the inn in a carriage and headed towards the city gate. Early in the morning, the city was very lively. A merchant selling steamed buns. A porter carrying goods with his feet and shoulders. There were even porters pulling rickshaws. Many carriages came and went like the wind on the wide street, carrying all kinds of supplies to and from the port. If one ignored the pale faces of the people at the bottom of the society, it looked like a lively and prosperous scene. Sitting in the carriage, he opened the curtain and watched everything. However, he was still too insignificant. Thinking about so many things seemed meaningless. After approaching the city gate, a few soldiers inspected the carriage. After confirming that there were no problems, he was about to let them go. On the city wall, a soldier in bright armor was running over. He whispered a few words into the mouth of the soldiers who were checking. The soldiers were clearly surprised. After looking at Li Yueming's carriage a few times, "Please wait, my lords. Our city lord wishes to see you." Wang Ermeza's expression changed. Subconsciously, he was ready to draw his long saber and attack. Li Yueming reached out to stop him. He lifted the curtain and asked, "Where is your city lord?" The soldier was shocked by Wang Ermeza's actions. Finally regaining his senses, he hurriedly lowered his head and bowed. "City lord has been waiting here since early morning. Please move." Li Yueming glanced at the traffic at the entrance. This was the busiest time for cargo between Qingdu Port and Ligang City. The city gate was filled with people and supplies. Even if he wanted to leave, he probably wouldn't be able to go far. "Then please lead the way." The soldier nodded. Under Wang Ermeza's vigilant gaze, he carefully extended his hand. He pulled the reins of the carriage and walked towards a secluded house not far from the city gate. Just as he reached the door, Li Yueming saw a middle-aged man in his 30s anxiously waiting. After seeing the carriage come over, the middle-aged man heaved a sigh of relief. He jogged out and chased away the soldiers who were holding the rope. "Mr. Warrior, I'm Ma Baifan, the current city lord of Ligang City. You were the ones who destroyed the Iron Fist Brotherhood's stronghold last night, weren't you?" In the carriage, Li Yueming neither denied nor admitted it. Instead, he changed the topic and asked, "May I know why the city lord is looking for us?" Li Yueming didn't deny it. Ma Baifan also had an idea in his heart. He rubbed his hands together and said excitedly, "You still don't know, right? You're now the hero of all the ordinary people in Li City." Hearing his extremely awkward flattery, Li Yueming's expression didn't change. He didn't care about the false reputation of being a hero. He was more concerned about the city lord in front of him going through so much trouble, even personally running over to lead his horse. What was his intention? Part 3 of the series ends here. If you enjoyed it, please give us a like and subscribe so we can be motivated to make even better videos in the future.